puppies and kittens. Welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. I ran into some wackaloon on the internet yesterday and social media, and he was just so crazy. I'm like, well, we've got to hang up. We've got to have a hangout. Yeah, we'll have this argument that way because this will be fun, and my audience would appreciate it. And what day or time can you do? And he wants to do Saturday at about this time. I'm like, I can't do Saturday at about this time. Why is that? Well, because I host a Bible study. It's always fun when I have to explain that to the ardent believers. But anyway, that's what we're doing. So, welcome everybody. Any opening comments?
It's good to be here.
Yeah. I am fucking hungover. Let's go.
Excellent.
Shame on
Good
you,
to be
Lauren.
back. See everyone. It's going to be funny to watch the crazy. The Bible is always so interesting.
I gotta say, Lawrence so reminds me of like the best points of youth. I'm so fucking hungover. Let's go.
Yeah. I've had 2 vitamin gummy bears. Let's go.
Wow, amazing.
All right. So who is reading this morning?
Morning.
Yeah, we're reading 1 Samuel 3rd. I forget how do we read this?
First Samuel 3.
I can read.
Sir, you are not an orange with dementia.
Right, yeah. What did he call it? Was it 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians? One of those. He
2
called it-
Corinthians walk into a bar.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, I thought it was because he was writing it to Corinthians. Were they not the target audience?
They were.
All right. Well, am I going to read this first chapter?
I suppose I'll read it because I don't have much to say on chapter 3. I'll have more to say for chapter 4.
Okay.
So, chapter 3. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out. And Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, Samuel, Samuel. And he said, Here I am, and ran to Eli, and said, Here I am, for you called me. But he said, I did not call. Lie down again. So he went and lay down. The Lord called again, Samuel, Samuel. There's just Samuel. Then it says, Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But he said, I did not call you, or I did not call my son. Lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord God called Samuel again, a 3rd time. And he got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, Go, lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. Then the Lord said to Samuel, See, I am about to do something in Israel that will make both ears of anyone who hears of it tingle. On that day I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house, from the beginning to end. For I have told him that I am about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them. Therefore I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be expiated by sacrifice or offering forever. Samuel lay there until morning. Then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord. Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. But Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. He said, "Here I am." Eli said, "What was it that he told you? Do not hide it from me. May God do so to you and more also if you hide anything from me of all that he told you." So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. Then he said, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." As Samuel grew up, the Lord was with him and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was a trustworthy prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh. Yeah, couple interesting things here.
Yeah, we got a guy who hears voices, and first of all is encouraged to listen to the voices in his head.
Yeah. Also,
Well, a child.
sorry, I didn't finish the sentence. It kind of breaks off weirdly here. Yeah, so Samuel at Shiloh by the word of the Lord. That's it. That's the last
Yeah.
part. Yeah. But yeah, the I think so. It says at the end there that let him do what seems good to him, but then we don't weirdly get like a narrative of it. It just kind of like assumes that it happens, and then it goes on into now. I mean, later we get the when Eli dies, but um, we don't get the narrative of it. Instead, we jump to like, oh, and Samuel was this great guy who the Lord loved so much, right? We kind of jump right into that.
Okay.
It's
So we have. Go ahead, Lila.
No, I was just saying, like, further to your point, this is a child who's hearing things in the night while he's half asleep, which of course is perfectly normal. And of course, the healthiest thing to do is to encourage him to think that, the beginning of dream state is the voice of the Lord, and he should take that seriously. And yeah.
No, what was really
So I'm.
sorry. Go ahead, Aaron.
No. Go ahead, you.
So we also kind of earlier on in the chapter, so he's being called multiple times, but then he needs to get kind of the instructions from Eli on how to respond to God in order to get God to tell him things. See, it makes sense because like in other narratives, right, we have God calling out to people going, "Here I am," and then God speaking to them. But the thing is, they're actually going to God, right? So it is really interesting that we have this. I'm not even sure what to call it, but that God is not fully telling him everything, or not fully revealing himself until he acknowledges that he's talking to God, which might be an important theme in revelatory texts, I guess you could call it.
Yeah, I can see
Yeah,
that.
I was going to mention that this section here is what I've heard some rabbis comment that this is a real example of like prophecy in the Hebrew Bible, where there's a word of the Lord that's given, and then it says that this will happen because of this, and then eventually it does happen exactly or more or less how it was first prescribed. Now, that being said, when Christians are like trained, or when they're reading scripture, they oftentimes see prophecy when there is none,
Mhm.
because like all the double fulfillment and all the other stuff that gets used up in the New Testament as like, oh, Jesus did this and Jesus fulfills that prophecy. It's is utilizing a lot of what is perhaps not real prophecy according to the Hebrew Bible. The other
Oh,
thing too.
sorry. I
Oh,
thought it
were
was
you
my
going to
turn.
say
Never mind.
something
Go ahead.
about
Go
that?
ahead. No, go ahead. You were probably on the same train. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Well, so I was actually just gonna pivot in just kind of reading this critically. It really seems clear that how the prophecy is being um, given, or the method, it really sounds like sleep paralysis. Like this is the same sort of thing that happens people that suffer from this condition where you fall asleep and then you're immediately into a REM sleep, like all of a sudden, and you're seeing things. And just how it seems, at least from my perspective, how Eli is because there's not real a God that's manifesting here. It's just Eli is recontextualizing whatever Samuel is experiencing, and he's saying, yeah, that which you're seeing, that's actually Yahweh. And maybe I don't know, maybe I'm just reading it way too literal, but it really does seem like that's what's actually happening here.
And I think at least from the people I've talked to, it kind of seems like audible hallucinations are far more common than visual ones. Like I've gotten like audible hallucinations, like while falling asleep, especially. Happens from time to time, pretty rare. Uh, but a couple of times at least it's happened. But the thing that I was thinking of was this he doesn't acknowledge that it's God 3 times. I forget what's the chapter in the New Testament uh where he denies Jesus 3 times. Is it Peter?
So
Peter.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Was that in John, I feel?
It's in several of them, actually.
Okay, is
It's
it in several?
included in Luke, Matthew, probably Mark, since it's those two. And
Yeah, I don't
yeah,
remember, but
it's one of the semi-common. It's still contradictorily told, but
sure, yeah.
it's one of the more common ones. Yeah, but the denying 3 times, although in this case it's just a child being like half awake, and
It is, yeah.
that auditory hallucination on the border of dreams is not a sign of disorder in and of itself. That's something that can absolutely happen to any sleeping
Yeah.
brain given the right conditions. When you go into
Yeah.
your REM state will vary based on a lot of factors.
Yeah.
And it's not always clear.
Yeah, in fact,
Well,
and just a brief thing, because I do have experience in sleep medicine, and I dealt with that a lot as a sleep technologist. We all have hallucinations, and dreams and nightmares are both hallucinations. And there's a mechanism in the brain that will sort of like make you forget that the memory of the hallucination, but it takes like 10 minutes. So the whole thing is like, if you are something arouses you from sleep, within those first 10 minutes after your REM sleep hallucination is finished, then you're very likely to remember it, and it feels really vivid, like you just actually lived it. And that's why people have that effect that, well, not everyone, but they
That's
think that they had a
interesting.
vision, but no, it's just you woke up a
Good to
little
know.
early.
I know that they say that, depending on if you remember your dreams just after you wake up, if you don't focus on them at all, you will forget them. But that's why some people will have like dream journals and they'll write it down right away. And this helps to process it and put it into the conscious memory, which I guess could be helpful for some things. I don't know. But it's, in a time before mental health was a thing, when the spiritual was thought to inhabit every facet of life, it's very natural that people would assume that this had something to do with the divine. Although the message itself is pretty fucked up, because, Eli's sons have been misbehaving, stealing from the treasury, being douchebags, entitled brats, and whatnot. But Eli is just being told that, like, by this little boy, that God has said he's going to kill your kids. And he has to say, okay, well, God will do what God's going to do. And it's creepy. It reminds me of Aaron when he's not allowed, Aaron, sorry, not you. Aaron in the Old Testament, the Exodus, when he's not allowed to mourn for his sons because God strikes them dead because they pissed him off. It's like God is just such a dick. And he doesn't want you to even love or advocate for your children. And yeah, maybe you were too indulgent and spoiled them, and you shouldn't have done that. But like, that means you should just be like, okay, I guess you're going to kill them.
Yeah, there's no attempt to help them or like have them change their mind or repent. It's just like, oh, you did that? All right, well, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
So you heard a voice in your sleep. I'm just going to judge and tell you as fact, as if it was a fact when I don't fucking know. I'm going to tell you that rather than a dream or anything, that was actually God. Because we just say things as fact when we don't really know. Because that's the way Bible people are, right? And so this kid hears the voice of God, and we've heard what an awesome thing the voice of God is, and he thinks over and over again, he thinks that's his dad, which means that if they had radio in Eli's day, he would have been a slamming DJ.
And I think it's
Right.
clear too that it's happening inside Samuel's head. because if it was like this audible voice, like from the mountaintop or whatever, then you'd figure that Eli would have also heard Yahweh's voice.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
I
mean,
don't know
and
if other
remember,
translations read it the same way, but the one that Lawrence read and the one I was reading said that the Lord stood there.
Mm-hmm.
So that God is calling him from another room. Mr. Omni Everywhere has to go into the kid's room and stand there. Mr. Spiritual doesn't have a body, has to stand there. Which I'm
Well,
wondering if
God still had a body at this point. I was reading Francesca Stavropolka's book on the body of God, a very recent one, and loving it. It's amazing talking about how much God clearly had a body for so many years until theology found it necessary for him not to. But yeah, it's you think about people who think they've been abducted by aliens. You often have that same thing where you or that they're possessed by demons because they saw a shadowy figure standing by their bed while they were in a state of sleep paralysis, kind of half awake, half dreaming, and couldn't move their body. And yeah, like your body resets, like it's like a computer turns on and off and back on when you sleep. And if everything doesn't boot up correctly, I mean, one time as a kid, I woke up being unable to speak because it just didn't boot up correctly. And my mom was like, okay, go back to sleep and you'll be fine. And I was, but
Yeah.
it freaked me out.
Yeah, you have what's called muscle atonia, which is when the chemistry does not allow really your muscles to contract, other than those involved in respiration and the heart, of course. And that's a process that has to kind of be dictated by hormones, and so your sleep cycles will dictate what's happening. And that's why you'll see like dogs when they're full REM sleep, they're like really flaccid, and babies are like that during that stage because nothing's really contracting.
Oh, I
Yeah.
should counter this, and a quote from Tsumura, who writes that other scholars such as Nuse, I think, classify it as a dream theophany, that is, a theophany with an oral message, as in throughout the ancient Near East. However, fact remains that the divine message came to Samuel while he was awake. Therefore, this is not a dream, quote unquote, theophany in true sense.
And is that based on what? Is that based on the translation of that word "lie down"?
I guess
Well, the thing is, he
so.
got up, right? So, like, he
Yeah.
was. It seems like he was when he fully received the word of God, not just having his name shouted at him. He was awake for that. And
Yeah.
that's when like the full revelation comes. But
Yeah.
he might have been like asleep when
you can
he
think you're
was.
awake.
He might have been asleep when getting his name shouted, but like the full revelation, the full message doesn't come through until he's awake. But yeah, I mean, yeah. So this is different than the cases of people going to sleep specifically to get revelations from gods, which did happen a lot in the ancient Near East that you noted.
Yeah, I mean, it
prophetic
does.
dreams.
The chapter does start with him sleeping in a haunted house, right? So,
I mean, it just says that he was lying
one way of putting
down
it.
Yeah.
using that shakav, which I do see in the lexicon that in one of its translations is sleeping.
Yeah, that's also how the
Um,
JPS renders it. But I mean, the
Yeah, go back to sleep.
shin chaf bet, like, yeah, means like
mhm.
it usually means to lie down, but it can also have the sense of sleeping, as is suggested here. But yeah,
Yeah.
Tsumura renders it lying down.
Yeah, I mean, hello says to lie down to sleep, specifically on that verse. Um, so, but I don't see what else in the text
Sounds like the kid
would give
went
us
to bed.
indication that he was still awake. Like, I'm not really seeing what would
I
the
could
text.
see because he got up and went to Eli 3 times, or
Mhm.
yeah. So he would have had to get out of bed, and when he said go back and lay down and wait for the Lord, like
Mhm.
I can't imagine him falling back asleep very easily under those circumstances. He's already been, shocked out of sleep multiple times by this. So he would have at least thought he was awake, even if he had fallen asleep.
He was
And
also told to
presumably,
respond. like
Yeah.
audibly respond to this voice. So
This is the response
Yeah.
you should give. Yeah, it's and dreams and premonitions were absolutely expected. But this is his first prophecy is not a new prophecy. He's affirming the judgment against Eli that has already been spoken. So this is it would be
He might not
considered
have known about it.
he'd been living in the temple. I find it highly unlikely that he wouldn't at the very least have overheard some gossip about that somewhere. Because he's been living in the temple since he was weaned. And whatever's going down with Eli and his sons, he would have heard about it. And he would have felt, I imagine, I can remember being that pious child and thinking that you had an obligation to affirm whatever stupid shit they said God had said, and that you weren't allowed to feel upset about it, or you could be like regretful but still have to stand by God's judgment kind of thing, which is a really fucked up thing to put on a kid, but that's religion.
Got a couple comments here. Say10616 says, what is prophecy anyways? As I understand, prophecy doesn't imply necessarily divination. It could just mean delivering some message from God.
there are different methods of prophecy and how people have received it, but there is something weirdly divine about it, as in like in the ancient world, it would have been all considered divine, right? Whether that be like a direct interaction from God, or whether it be like, even if you're doing just regular divining, even that in a sense is from prophecy, because if you believe that everything is ordained by God, it's set in its path kind of thing, at least having some semblance of determinism, even though you wouldn't necessarily call it that, it could still be considered prophecy.
Divining portents among the stars. Actually, I had an interesting experience with this, because I grew up, obviously, and I was a teenager through those developmental finding yourself years in the church, and I was told that I had prophetic gifts. Now, I'm fairly certain what I had was the pattern-seeking form of the tism, but I would see things other people didn't, and I didn't realize they didn't see, and then I would say them unselfconsciously, as you do, and then they'd be like, "Ooh, you have prophetic gifts," and I was like, "I do? Okay."
Yeah, I think prophecy in the Bible isn't necessarily like foreseeing the future, but that would have been a method of testing if someone is a true prophet. Like, how do we know he's talking to God? Oh, he made
if you make a prediction, it has to come true, or you're full of it.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing about this chapter, isn't it? Because you have this kid who hears voices in his head. His dad decides that the voices in his head are really God.
Not dad.
He's called his
supervisor.
son, because in the ancient world, if you take someone like under your wing as like a student or something, you'd often refer to them as your son.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, I think if you're talking to somebody directly, you would say like father, son, like just for older and younger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. But the point is that now that the kid is hearing these voices and got the supervisor or whatever. I just saw a movie about that was a little bit like that last night, where somebody's calling somebody dad, but it's not their dad, but they do that. But anyway, so now the kid is hearing voices and listening to and believing the voices, and this is the criteria by which the surrounding people decide that the kid is trustworthy. But he hears voices in his head and he believes the voices in his head. Therefore, we know we can trust him.
Well, and the voices in his head affirmed a prophecy already made. So clearly,
confirmation bias.
I think verse 19 and 20 is trying to imply that because the Lord was with him and did not leave any of his predictions unfulfilled, the people knew that he was trustworthy. Remember, this is
Again,
a legendary story.
maintain pattern-seeking tism can set you up for that, and it's honestly a lot easier to tell people you're psychic than to try and walk them through your thinking.
But I feel like we have to stress that the story was written as if he was a real prophet.
Of course.
In the context of the story,
Mhm.
you know, God is real and he likes Samuel. Like, that's what's happening.
In the narrative.
And I think
saw a movie
another
like that too. Somebody is a,
like,
is
it's
a time
interesting that
traveler
even-
and realizes they can't
Yeah.
tell the person that they're a time traveler, so because they wouldn't believe that they were a time traveler, so they tell them they're a psychic.
Yeah,
And-
far more believable.
Honestly, people will buy it easier and it requires less explanation. If I ever get completely tired of dealing with normies, I'm just going to give up and say that. It'll be easier and they'll listen to me more.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it is interesting though that even in the context of this story was written as a narrative where magic is real, it still comes across like, you know, that's well, he could have just been dreaming. Like, it's, you know what I mean? And then it just says as like a footnote, oh, people believed him because he made other prophecies that were good. It's like, okay.
And they get another comment from Sailman. It's a little bit off topic. $4.99. Thank you. Says, does the Christian word hell come from the Norse hell?
It's the same.
Lawrence?
It's the same root.
I have no idea where the word actually comes from. It would make
it's
sense.
a Germanic word.
Marcel.
I think.
Yeah, we would have to speculate. We don't have an answer.
I think. Well, Isaac seems pretty confident.
I'm almost sure I'm almost 100% sure that it's not taken from the idea of hell from Norse mythology, but the same.
Just the
it's
word?
the same word.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
Hel is the daughter of I forget the name, but whoever is like the
Yeah.
ruler of the underworld, right?
Wotan or Odin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's.
I think that's
it's an
not really-
English. It's an English word meaning the underworld, and it's Germanic and is related to the ones the other Germanic languages that use it.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not a Christian word. It's an English word. So we need to then maybe consider like the Greek words that are being used in the New Testament referring to that place.
Yeah, but I think they do use like Hades and stuff, don't they? Which is interesting.
They do.
Hades and,
There is yeah, I don't want to get into it right now. It'd take too long to explain, but it'd be far off topic.
Arn,
But
you've,
there is a reason why they use Hades.
Arn, you've been there, didn't you ask? Just curious.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of places where I don't talk to the political leaders.
No, but you were in hell, didn't you ask whether or not that was the
Yeah,
actual?
I'm just there for the tourist sites. I highly recommend their breakfast buffet. Okay.
They serve a full English.
Hmm.
Yeah, I stayed at a place called Scandic Hotel in Hell, Norway, and it was adorable. It was a beautiful hotel. It really did have an excellent breakfast buffet and everything. But the thing that I found most charming about it was the two stereotypically blonde Norwegian hostesses. When I get the room and she hands me the keys, she goes, "Welcome to hell." That's so cute.
Oh, it's like the help desk.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah. We should probably get back to the text. Wait. Has Tomer read his commentary?
Actually, I don't have any.
I don't have none.
We need a
You're-
T-shirt
you're-
for that.
Any on
Oh,
You're
sorry,
gonna be
I lied.
American.
I lied. I do have. I'm sorry. So on verse 1, there were not many visions. In Hebrew, en chazon nifratz. The verb nifratz is derived from the root pei resh tzadik, which means to open or burst out. Some understood nifratz in the sense of revealed, i.e., no prophecy was revealed, as in Targum, Peshita, and Kinchi. Rashi and Ditrani read pei resh tzadik as widespread, as in Genesis 28:14, and thus there was no widespread vision. This reading is favored by modern commentators.
Also important to know, I think during the I think it was in the 2nd century, like after the 2nd century BCE, I think that the common interpretation was that the age of prophecy was over, which is why a lot of people were just kind of waiting for the coming eschaton, which would stand in line with why not only were there some people claiming to be end times prophets by the 1st century CE, but the why there would be so much denial of them as well, because it was commonly held that the age of prophecy is over, prophecy no longer happens.
That's kind of
That'd be fun
funny.
later on, but yeah.
That's such a religious trope. Whenever you have a sacred book that has lots of prophecies in it that came true and it was all very dramatic and God was all up in people's business, and someone goes, why is that not happening today? You have the time of prophecy was over. The church did the same thing with certain spiritual gifts. So that was just for the apostles. That was just for this.
Hey, and on that note, I think that might be the reason why, out of all the things that Samuel could have been doing, the text talks about him guarding the lamp in the temple, and I think that might be significant of that as well. The
Very illustrative.
Yeah.
That's one of the weird things. Like, the lamp of God had not yet gone out, which, if it's talking about like the candelabra in the temple, like normally, if you look at the scripture, it says that you light it during the day and you don't leave it out on during the night. It's like, what?
Maybe there was an eternal fire tradition that was
there is an eternal fire tradition, but that one wouldn't go out. So it's like,
I think this one is where we have the two different accounts of it, right? Because like one, you would have to like light at a certain time, but then in the other one, it's like it never goes out.
Yeah, exactly. So they're like, what light is this talking about? And it's like, maybe it's talking about a general night, like a light that they put on during the night for security or something. Like, they don't know. That's what I'm saying. Like, it's interesting this story has that feature.
Gotcha.
Okay, on verse 3, the lamp of God. In Hebrew, Ner Elohim. Most commentators and translations understood this term literally, that this refers to a lamp in the Lord's sanctuary. Klein notes that many commentators interpret the mention of the unextinguished lamp to mean that the theophany took place just before dawn. He notes that according to Exodus 27:21, the priests were to light a lamp from evening until morning. Some interpret the lamp allegorically. For example, Chazal in Genesis 58 wrote that this refers to the lamp of prophecy, quote unquote, being transferred from Eli to Samuel.
Somewhere it sounds like you're underwater.
Yeah, you're breaking up badly.
I think it's a StreamYard issue.
Now it's better.
No, now you're good.
It happens a lot, like even to others here, right? We've had this issue like multiple times in StreamYard.
Yeah, and it comes and goes.
Move yourself a little closer to your microphone if you can.
I am.
Okay.
That's the issue. Okay.
Yeah.
Where do you want me to start again?
No.
I think we heard you. It's just like we had to pay attention, which is
no. Yeah. Okay. So I'll come back to the interpretation allegorically. So some interpret the lamp allegorically. For example, Chazal in Genesis 58:2 wrote that this refers to the lamp of prophecy, quote unquote, being transferred from Eli to Samuel. Bar-Efrat writes that whereas Eli's world is filled with eternal darkness, Samuel's world is lightened by the lamp of God. Tsumura, however, writes, one might wisely avoid making allegorical interpretation, especially in our postmodern, quote-unquote, society, in which multiple readings are encouraged and meanings are admittedly created by readers. On that same verse, Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord, where the ark of God was. It is not clear why Samuel lied next to the house of the Lord, in Hebrew, Heichal Yehovah. Rashi wrote that Samuel slept with the Levites who were guarding the temple, as we see in the Targum. McCarter notes that the Ark of God is the most sacred object in the Israelite cult, and speculates that Samuel's bed was there because he needed to be nearby to discharge some cultic responsibility. Klein writes that the view that Samuel participated in some kind of initiation rituals seems contradicted by his repeated suspicion that Eli, not God, was calling him.
Yeah,
On
that
verse-
would be strange because, like, even if he was a Levite, he wouldn't. You would assume that he wouldn't have be doing these jobs and stuff because normally the priests would do it.
I guess you could say he was an apprentice priest brought on, to serve the Lord from childhood. And I mean, there's often, depending on the culture, there can be
Yeah.
a concept
When
of
the story was
spiritual
written, it
maturity
might
of
not have been.
children.
When the story was written, it probably wasn't a problem to have non-priests doing stuff in the temple or sleeping in the temple. But later, commentators would have found that problematic based on, how the law had progressed.
It's almost
And
like
they have to
religion
explain it away.
changes and evolves over time.
Yeah.
Now on verse 4, and the Lord called Samuel. Rashi writes that the voice came out from the temple of God, from the Holy of Holies. Septuagint and 4Q Samuel A read, Yahweh called Samuel Samuel, twice Samuel. This reading is favored by most commentators, although Klein and Tsumura preserve the MT, with the former writing that it is, quote, difficult to tell which is more original, end quote. On verse 7, Samuel did not yet know the Lord. Although the Septuagint, Vulgate, and Peshitta understood know in its usual sense, the Targum reads, Samuel had not yet learned to know instruction from before the Lord. Likewise, Rashi wrote that Samuel wasn't familiar with the voice of prophecy, quote unquote. Kimchi writes that Samuel did not yet know the wisdom of God. McCarter writes that knowing Yahweh means to have a special relationship with Yahweh. Auld notes that knowledge, quote unquote, related to Yahweh is a rare commodity, associated only with David in 2 Samuel 5:12 and 7 verses 20 and 21, and possibly Solomon.
Fair enough. I think it's also somewhat necessary to the heroic narrative that the child not assume it's God right away, because that would be arrogance. Whereas it's, humble to simply and normal to think that, dad's calling from the next room.
Got another comment. This one from Zep. I just want to make sure I'm reading that right. Pomodorino offers £5 and said Italian from Latin. Hell is inferno, and I think the root of infro that means below, and all Romance languages uses the same root for hell.
Interesting.
Makes sense.
I do love
Yeah,
language.
infernal, meaning like of the fire, can mean like from hell, right? Infernal being or whatever. Yeah.
And then Kip Davis, who's that? Kip Davis comes in and says, "This is the Shiloh Sanctuary, where rules and procedures were much less defined, and about which we know much less."
Okay, now on verse 10, the Lord came and stood there. Targum reads, the glory of the Lord was revealed and stood forth. Kimchi proposed that Samuel saw an image through prophetic vision. Abravanel, however, rejected this, writing instead that the voice of the Lord stood in Samuel's ears. Several commentators follow Kimchi and write that Yahweh's revelation to Samuel was both visionary as well as auditory. Auld notes
Let's
that...
just stop a second. Because last time when you sounded a bit underwater, when we stopped, you started again, it sounded fine. So let's try that again.
Wait, maybe I should refresh.
No, you still sound underground water.
I'll refresh.
Yeah.
Okay, well, while he's doing that, Martin Urbani offers €11.99 and says, "Hi, Aaron and panel. 2 weeks ago, I was in Deuteronomy. Now I'm in Judges. I'm catching up and having a lot of fun doing it." Well, good to hear that.
Yeah, Judges is wild.
Oh,
That's much better, Tommy.
Yeah, let's see. Should I read this again? Did you
No.
come? Of course not, Aaron. Yeah. Okay, so I'll move. No, actually, I have one more thing. Auld notes that nowhere else in the Hebrew Bible is Yahweh said to take position before a human.
I also like that God's word stood in his ear.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Oh.
That's yeah.
What?
Yeah, I
Oh,
said
that's
this.
an interesting turn of phrase.
Yeah,
I
we
can
do.
very easily see the theological response to this, though. The Torah speaks with human lips, and also God's going to make it easy for a kid. We would hope. You know.
Oh, yeah, by the way, I wanted to say, like, because, I mean, as Lawrence talked about it before, because the word used here for the child or youth is nar, again, we don't necessarily know how old he was, just that he was in, like, a subservient position, kind of, as well. So it could be that he was young, a youth or a lad, but it could also refer to just someone, like, because he was, like, an assistant.
Sort of
It doesn't, yeah. It's
lower
not
station.
clear how old he is. Yeah.
Okay, so on that same verse, speak, for your servant is listening. Eli instructs Samuel to say, speak, Yahweh, for your servant is listening, in verse 9. Although Volkit and Peshitta add Yahweh to the verse, the Masoretic text is preserved in the Septuagint and Targum. Rashi wrote that Samuel thought to himself that it might have been a different voice. Kimchi writes that he was afraid of mentioning Yahweh's name. He notes that according to Midrash Tanchuma Tzav 13, Samuel was afraid that he heard a demon's voice, but he writes that this is far-fetched. Tsumura writes that the repetition with variation is typical of narrative and verbatim repetition is not necessary. On verse 11, make the ears of everyone who hears about it tingle. The Hebrew Bible reads, Tetzilena shtei oznav. Yeah, the word, I actually really like this phrase in Hebrew. The Hebrew tetzilena is generally taken from the root tzadik lamed lamed, which means to tingle, ring, or quiver. Bar-Efrat writes that this is a common pictorial expression, found also in 2 Kings 21:12 and Jeremiah 19:3, to describe the shock and trembling caused by hearing of a great disaster. Although McCarter and Klein wrote that these passages are Deuteronomistic, Tsumura writes that the use of the phrase does not mean that this verse derives from the late monarchic period, since the corpus we have of surviving ancient Israelite documents is far too limited to determine dates statistically.
Not wrong.
Now on verse 13, his sons blasphemed God. The Masoretic text reads, for his sons were cursing to them or to themselves. In Hebrew, ki mekalelim lahem banav, which sounds odd. Septuagint has, because his sons were reviling God. According to several rabbinic sources, this is an example of tikkun soferim, correction of the scribes in Hebrew, an alteration of the original biblical text meant to preserve God's or someone else's honor. Rashi writes that the text should have read mekalelim li, were cursing me. But Kimchi writes that the text should be read as mekalelim lo, were cursing him. Some traditional commentators rejected altering the text. For example, Gersonides writes that Israel would curse Eli's sons for how they behaved at the altar. Abravanel writes that the sons were cursing themselves because they alone carried their guilt. However, modern commentators follow the Septuagint and see the Masoretic text as a correction. Carmel McCarthy, in the Tikkunei Soferim, pages 78 to 79, writes, the adoption of the original wording of the phrase restores the gravity of the offense and the reason for the ensuing severe punishment decreed for the house of Eli, and at the same time illustrates the motive which must have promoted the alteration, reverence for the use of the divine name, which would not allow its usage in conjunction with curse. An allusion to this emendation may lie in the following tradition recorded in the Talmud in Yevamot 79a. Quote, Rabbi Chia bar Abba reported in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, it is better that one letter be uprooted from the Torah than that the name of names be publicly profaned.
On that note, I have to throw in that in American tradition, if a woman is named Ellen, Eleanor, Elizabeth, or Elena, then their nickname would be Ellie. And that's why the name Eli, the man's name Eli, was pronounced by Americans as Eli. It just amuses me whenever he says Ellie, and I'm like, Ellie, what does this have to do with her?
I mean, we would say it as Eli.
Eli or Eli.
Yeah, I know,
if
but
you're
I'm
Yemenite.
saying like, yeah, so the same. Ashkenazi would say Eli, because Eli is also a nickname for.
And I
which is
grew up with
also-
Eli as well.
Eli is normally like a nickname for someone whose name is like Eliyahu or Elijah or what's the other one?
Elisha.
Elisha as
Elisha.
well.
Elisha.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
So
always
those
thought
two
that Eli-
names, those would be shortened to Eli, and
Yeah.
Eli is the guy's name in this story, and it's not a common name at all.
Yeah,
Mhm.
go ahead.
Okay, on verse 14, the guilt of Eli's house will never be atoned for by sacrifice or offering. According to Leviticus 4, verses 3 to 12, the sins of priests can be atoned for by offering a sacrifice. Kara writes that the sons of Eli do not get atonement by sacrificing or offering, since they have maliciously trampled with them, as seen in 229. Likewise, Klein writes, quote, since the sacrifices and meal offerings were things greedily coveted by the sons of Eli, seen in 2 verses 17 and 29, and were therefore the occasion of their sin, how could these same sacrifices ever offer any means of expiation? End quote. Chazal in Talmud Rosh Hashanah 18a wrote that while they can't atone with sacrifice or offering, they can atone through Torah study and the performance of acts of kindness.
Interesting, because I think in Christian theology, like soteriology, they make a huge emphasis on that. And they'll point at texts like this in that, expiation is not a one done thing. Like it's just that God's wrath is being postponed. And so you have to keep on sacrificing, otherwise God's wrath comes. But that only in Jesus. That's we make a huge exception, and his sacrifice is once for all.
Yeah, but you can never be quite too certain, because on that day many will say to me, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied? And I will say, away from me, I never knew you, to summarize. But yeah, there's a balance between trying to keep you on the hamster wheel of panic and fear, but not pushing that too far to the point where you collapse and walk away.
Sounds an awful lot like Trump again. When you disappoint him. And yesterday he was praising you as being a great person, the best people, but then you disappointed him, and then no, I never heard of him.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's standard narcissistic abuse, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll continue on verse 17. May God deal with you, be ever so severely, if you had anything he told you. Bar-Efrat notes that this was a common oath formula found in 1444, 2013, and 2522, etc. The oath maker avoids mentioning the punishment directly and uses the implicit thus in Hebrew ko. Auld notes that the oath was used more by David than any other leader, as well as by Ruth in 117. Klein notes Smith's opinion that such an oath was, quote, originally accompanied by the slaying of an animal, and that the fate of the animal was threatened to the person who would not carry out some desired activity, though there is no indication of such a ceremony in this case.
It's a very common turn of phrase. They use it in words too.
Yeah, it sounds like something a parent would tell their kid, like, you don't know what I'm gonna do to you if you don't do what I'm telling you to do. Like,
God will strike you down if you lie to me.
Mm-hmm.
Now on verse 19, he let none of Samuel's word fall to the ground. This reading is in line with the Masoretic text and is preserved by the Septuagint, Vulgate, and Peshitta. Targum reads, and none of all his words failed. Likewise, Kimchi comments, all that he would say was fulfilled, and the Holy One, blessed is he, fulfills by his hands even the things that would say not through the spirit of prophecy. End quote. McCarter writes that the Hebrew expression denotes letting McCarter writes that the Hebrew expression denotes, quote, letting nothing he said be ineffective, end quote, or, quote, letting nothing he said prove false, end quote. And finally, on verse 21, the Septuagint reads, and the Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, for the Lord had revealed himself to Samuel, and from one end of the land and as far as the other, Samuel was believed to be a prophet of the Lord to all Israel. And Eli was a very old man, and his sons kept advancing, and their way was evil before the Lord, end quote. McCarter writes that the Septuagint is the original, having fallen out of the Masoretic text as part of a long haplography. Klein writes that the Masoretic text is a secondary correction added after the original text. And Auld comments, it is not easy to decide whether to describe the longer Septuagint as development or simply restatement of part of the shared text. If the first sentence was drafted as restatement, i.e., and from one end of the land to the other end, looks like a rephrasing of from Dan to Beersheba in verse 20, we might suppose that Vaye'eman, hypothetical antecedent of the Septuagint, was nif'al, like Ne'eman, trustworthy, before it. However, the Septuagint rendered it as hif'il, so portraying Samuel as passing the test that Isaiah put to the house of David in Isaiah 7:9b. Im lo ta'aminu ki lo te'amenu, in Hebrew, if you will not believe or trust, you will certainly not be established. In what he adds about Eli's sons, the author of the text underlying Septuagint appears to recognize the influence of 2 Samuel 5:10. Vayelech David haloch v'gadol, David kept growing stronger. That's it.
Okay, we ready to move on to 4?
Yeah, I mean, there is no interesting ancient Christian commentaries. Just at least not the funny
Christians are
ones.
very
So.
dull.
Well,
Really?
they
No
can be
one-
extremely.
No one wants to compare Jesus to Samuel or something silly.
I'm sure there's
No,
someone
not
who
really.
made a equivalent to him at the temple when he was 12, even though there's no real parallels. But you can always stretch.
Kip Davis chimes in to say, for many, perhaps most Christians, the atonement is blood magic. Though, of course, they don't call it magic, but yeah.
Right, yeah.
I think that was part of a conversation in the chat.
That was a conversation we had, I think, the first time I was on this show, that Christianity is blood magic and human sacrifice.
Yeah. All right, so I will go ahead and jump into 1 Samuel 4. And the word of Samuel came to all Israel. In those days, the Philistines mustered for war against Israel, and Israel went out to battle against them. They encamped at Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped at Aphek. The Philistines drew up in line against Israel, and when the battle was joined, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the field of battle. And God sat back with his popcorn and giggled. When the troops came to the camps, the elders of Israel said, why has the Lord put us to rout today before the Philistines? Let us break the Ark of the Covenant and the Lord here from Shiloh, so that he may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies. So the people sent to Shiloh and brought from there the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. The two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord came unto the camp, all Israel gave a mighty shout, so that the earth resounded. When the Philistines heard the noise of the shouting, they said, what does this great shouting in the camp of the Hebrews mean? When they learned that the Ark of the Lord had come to the camp, the Philistines were afraid, for they said, gods have come into the camp? Gods, plural, have come into the camp. They also said, woe to us, for nothing like this has ever happened before. Nobody's ever seen it. It's like nobody's ever seen. Who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness. Take courage and be men, O Philistines, in order not to become slaves to the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Be men and fight. So the Philistines fought Israel, and they fought Israel and was defeated. I have a semicolon here, which makes no sense. Wait, yes. Philistines fought, Israel was defeated, and they fled, everyone to his home. And there was a very great number, for there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers, tens of thousands.
Yeah.
The ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas died.
So I do think like we could continue, but I think for right now it's actually a good idea to stop there.
Well, I mean, it's a short chapter, so it's 22 verses.
I mean, I know, but there's already so much to
Okay.
cover. Like, okay, so I think the important part here is, so yeah, obviously, like the references to gods. Now, of course, the other potential one is like that this is just stuff that's been that should be considered singular, but has been taken as plural, or you might have some
I mean,
etymological reasons.
in
But
the Hebrew, the word is just Elohim, which,
right, yeah.
as you say,
Yeah,
is
but the
ambiguous.
Septuagint, I think, has like, is it the Septuagint
Yeah.
that has gods in plural? Yeah, it's
Ah,
Septuagint. Yeah.
it's interesting.
Got
So they were like, oh, if the Philistines are saying it, then they must be then they will they must
Well,
be
here-
saying gods.
Well, then you
Here's
have that
interesting.
word noble that's also in plural, the noble gods or whatever. The
Sure.
mighty gods. It has a
Yeah,
plural
Elohim
only.
Adirim. Yeah, but still, I think it's quite common for the Elohim, even if it's singular, to use plural adjectives sometimes. Because it's not about, let's say, it's not like, oh, we're talking about a singular thing. It's more about the ending of the suffix of the word should match the noun it's
Sure, yeah.
referring to. So like, yeah.
Well, I think one of the reasons that there might be this confusion is, so this is a hypothesis that I mean, I've talked about this before. So in Thomas Romer's The Invention of God, this book right here, it's quite good. It's quite good. And it's a pretty easy read. Like, you don't have to like know any like ancient languages or anything. It's written for lay people, but there's a chapter in it where he talks about the statue of Yahweh. So like we have one of our first hints here about the ark being a statue. At least in my opinion, I think it's a statue. So like when it says the people sent to Shiloh and brought from there the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. And then when they bring it out, the Philistines are like, oh, there are gods here. So like you could see this as a like if this were in fact historical, you could see this as as the Philistines, misrepresenting or not understanding the sacred objects of Israel. But I think the reality is that the Ark of the Covenant was a statue of Yahweh, and they probably had some other the temple objects with them as well, or they might have, right? Because there's not in this chapter, but in other chapters, we're going to have other descriptions of the ark or even God's throne, and they seem to always be accompanied by certain things, rather that be like other beings, other objects, what have you. There's a variety of ways to do it. There's this description in Isaiah 6. There's in Ezekiel 1. And while those are visions, they are describing the same object. So to me, the way I look at this is that Israel brought out, of course, later on in later periods, they kind of had to take out some of this imagery more explicitly, because in a later period they became aniconic. So they became a system that didn't like images. They figured that was one of the main reasons for them being exiled, was because they had all these images of God instead of just worshiping God. That was like one of the main justifications in their mind for the exile. So that was their improper worship. So I think that here we have some remnants of the ark being a statue of Yahweh, literally sitting on a throne.
And
Is that what then became the
would make
lid of the
sense.
ark?
Sorry, one at a time.
The lid
Go
of the ark, didn't that become the lid? Like the lid of the ark is often displayed with the cherubim, as if that became the lid. So are you saying that
Sure, yeah.
perhaps they were carrying idols, right? It sounds like they were carrying, you say statues, but these are like idols.
Maybe idols, yeah. This might be a big statue, right? Like the way I always viewed it was like the wings have to be touching, right? But to me, it's like if you picture like a cherubim on like the side of the throne, right? And like one wing is like, covering. I can't, I'm shit at drawing, so I can't draw what's in my head. But like one wing is like, kind of like the back of the throne, and the other wing kind of goes around to like the footstool portion of it, or like
sort
right
of
under
doing
the
like a
so like yeah,
but with
so like
wings.
on one end, the one cherubim was like this, on the other end another cherubim was like this, and they kind of cover the ark that way where the wings are still touching. That's how I always like imagined it, but I'd have to do like a more detailed study of it. But I think that there is a lot of hints pointing toward the ark being a statue, which would explain why the Philistines take it away and set it up with all their other god statues. It would explain why, after the exile, or like at the end of Kings, you have everyone or all the stuff being all the golden stuff being taken from the temple. And the thing about that is, while it doesn't explicitly say, it says that they like burned all the gold or something, or just destroyed all of it, whatever. But whatever they did with it, it doesn't explicitly say that the ark was destroyed, but we know from the descriptions of the ark that it probably had some gold on it, right? So in my view, it didn't have to necessarily say that the ark specifically was destroyed. I think it was just included in part of those golden things that were destroyed, which is why after the exile, we never hear of the ark again chronologically. It never pops up anywhere else in the Bible after that chronologically. And I think the reason is because it was destroyed. That's my little rant, but I think it was a statue.
That's been the assumption for a long time, that the ark was destroyed.
Well, a lot of people,
but
believe that like the
could have-
Ethiopian church has it.
yeah,
It's in
A
the
lot of people
Vatican,
claim
no?
things about it, or they say like, oh, it's stolen, it's just lost. No, I think it was destroyed then and there during that invasion.
That makes
That
sense.
doesn't
And then
match
the
the
memory of
movie
it.
at all.
well, obviously, Indiana Jones is keeping it safe for us, right?
Right, and then and then I guess the memory of it would have been, so there was a box with these cherubim on it, and in between was the presence of the Lord. So like it kind of would have changed it.
Right. But then
Yeah,
like
you
the
could
way
absolutely
the presence
change
is
that.
taken, there's a phenomenal paper from I can't pronounce their names. I think they're like I don't know where they're from, but I always have a hard time pronouncing their names. Let me pull it up. I think maybe they're German. But there is a phenomenal paper, and let me see if I can find the authors here. Okay, so the paper itself is about oh yeah, here it is. Okay, so it's from Christoph Eulinger and Suzanne Mueller Trufout. I don't know. So it's called Ezekiel 1: Babylonian Cosmological Scholarship and Iconography, and that has like a lot of cool stuff about the these visions of especially of statues, and even in was it Theodore Lewis's book on the origin and character of God. He goes over the kavod, right? That's the glory of the Lord,
Glory of God.
and kind of how that has been portrayed as well in iconography. How it's because they're not seeing God, they're seeing like what's essentially a reflection of God, an image of
The
God.
presence.
Yeah, the presence. So they're seeing like a copy of it, not God himself. So there is a lot of if we're going with the image of God stuff, you can you can kind of see how, like, in a period where they do have this aniconic view of how things should be, that they would be like, okay, this wasn't, we're just going to start talking about this statue as being his presence, right? Instead of him. So you can kind of see how that would be. It is, quite anachronistic, but they were trying to kind of hide the fact that they were once fans of iconography, just like everybody else in that time and place. So
I think what's interesting too is, if I remember the tradition correctly, isn't it where like the one and only day when the high priest is allowed to go inside the Holy of Holies, where the statue would be, that part of the instruction was that he would walk in, of course, after a series of sacrifice and some other things, but he would walk with the tray full of incense, lit incense, and that it had to be cloudy enough that would prevent him from being able to gaze at the Holy of Holies. So it's sort of like they're protecting the high priest from seeing whatever it's there. So there must be something that was kept there, that where this tradition came from, I think. Because if you're just staring at a box, what's the big deal, right?
sure, yeah.
Well, according to Lawrence's theory, it would have been to mask the fact that the room was empty. Because there was a period, I think, during like when you had like the Sadducees pretty much in control of the temple, where there was like a new high priest every year or something. Probably because they had to kill them when they found out the truth or whatever. Rather than it's because they were king when they shouldn't have. Like, rather than God killed them for looking upon his glory, it was There's a story about how they would like tie a rope around their waist when they would go in, because if they died inside, no one could go and get the body, so they would pull them out by the rope.
Right.
Yeah, I remember that one. That was in the law, I think, that you had to tie at least, or a string around his big toe or something, just so that you could haul the body out if God was annoyed and struck his priest dead, because that's how God do.
Trevor and Wright says, in which part of the Bible did the practice of animal sacrifice originate, and why is the idea of atonement in Christianity is used to explain forgiveness when there is no connection?
Trevor and Wright with the loaded questions.
Yeah.
Which part of the Bible?
Well, we do kind of have sacrifices and atonement in like the Torah stuff, right? Like to make up for sins.
Yeah,
there's a little bit of that.
sin, yeah.
And then we also have that stuff in we kind of have the same usage in some of the prophets. It's just not, I think most of the time it's not explicitly like,
I mean, there is the scapegoat
used that way,
which is like a
right?
sort of
Yeah,
communal thing.
But from what I've gathered, they're not the
symbolic
first
things.
ones to do this sort of thing. Like the Sumerians were making sacrifices to their gods as well.
right. Yeah.
Like,
Like well
everyone did
before the
animal
ancient
sacrifice,
Israelites.
pretty much.
No doubt.
Okay, so I'll start on my commentary. First on verse 1, and Samuel's word came to all Israel. Commentators generally see this phrase as belonging to chapter 3. For example, Bar-Efrat writes that evidence for this is found in the word davar, which means word, which is repeated quite often in chapter 3, and Samuel, who is not mentioned at all in chapters 4 through 6. Moreover, if verse 1a was meant to be a part of chapter 4, then Samuel sent Israel to a devastating war, an image which contradicts his image presented thus far in the book. The Septuagint shares this part of the Masoretic text at the end of the previous paragraph, i.e. 3 verses 19 to 21. And some, like McCarter and Klein, argued that this original Septuagint was lost through homo eoteleuton. Tsumura, however, rejected seeing this clause as part of chapter 3. Rather, he writes that this is a transitional technique, quote-unquote, presenting the setting for the following event, linking a new episode with the previous episode. Though Samuel is not mentioned in the next few chapters, he is mentioned here to emphasize that the people relied on their political leaders, i.e. the elders, and on their cultic object, the Ark of God, but did not seek the word of Yahweh through a prophet. He writes, therefore, that the verse should be understood as, quote, Though the word of Samuel was recognized throughout Israel, the people went out for battle without asking the will of the Lord through his prophet.
At the same time, though, this was the will of the Lord, because this is how he, exacts his judgment, as we'll see in the next chapter, at least in part. But yeah, it's funny how modern theologies spend so much time condemning those who behaved in accordance with the theology of their time. It would be completely normal at this time and in this part of the world to invoke the aid of your God through sacred artifacts, especially before battle. Like that we could see it retroactively as presumptive and yada yada yada, but that's not at all in line with the way religion was practiced at the time. So
now, on that same verse, the Israelites went out to fight against the Philistines. The Masoretic text doesn't give any reason for this war. Bar-Efrat writes that since the story is mainly about the fate of the ark and the house of Eli, the narrator doesn't state the cause of the war. Septuagint has the preceding, quote, "And it happened in those days that the Philistines mustered for war against Israel," end quote. Several commentators like Klein and McCarter take the Masoretic text omission as a case of homo eo teleuton. And Auld comments, Philistine initiative, saying the Septuagint, gives easier sense to Israel's going out to meet them, quote unquote. It would also demonstrate close correspondence between this first mention of Philistines in 1 Samuel and what may have been the opening words of BTH, i.e., Book of the Two Houses, in 31:1, where Philistines are fighting with Israel. Typical of the Hebrew Bible as a whole, the Philistines do not play a large part in the BTH. Saul falls to them in 1 Samuel 31, and David fights a successful early campaign against them in 2 Samuel 5, verses 17 to 25, and compare 8:1. But they are not mentioned again. Yet out of this success of David and failure of Saul in their major source, the books of Samuel create a major theme, with Philistines mentioned more in 1 Samuel alone than in all the rest of the Hebrew Bible altogether. Still on that same verse, Ebenezer, in Hebrew Ha'even Ha'ezer, literally the rock of help or aid, as we see in Vulgate, Peshitta, and Targum. The etiology for the name is given in 712, quote, "Samuel took a stone," in Hebrew Even, "and set it up between Mitzpah and Shen, and named it Ebenezer, for up to now, he said, the Lord has helped Azarenu, us," end quote. Kimchi already noted the irony in this name. Quote, "Scripture stated this because when this war occurred, it was a stumbling stone, Even Negef, and not a stone of help," quote unquote. End quote. The exact location of Even Ha'ezer is unclear, but commentators generally identified it as Izbet Tzarta, located between Rosh Ha'ain and Kfar Kasim.
Is there something there, like an archaeological site?
I think so. Generally, if you have like either Izbet or Chilbet, it's a archaeological
Just,
site.
a ruin or something.
Yeah. Okay, now on verse.
Ebenezer is also the name of a book and the author of that book.
Yeah.
He's also a famous Scrooge.
Shut up.
Oh yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
Is that connected?
I have no idea.
Is Ebenezer the name come from
I think
this
so.
Hebrew term?
I
I don't
think
know.
so.
I just felt like that would be a joke that Aaron would make.
Yeah. It's the book is by Balatuim. Okay, I'll continue on verse 3. Why did the Lord bring defeat on us? Here, the elders assume that Yahweh was the cause of their defeat. McCarter writes that the question is to some extent rhetorical, insofar as the speakers assume that the answer, i.e., the ark was absent, is self-evident. Klein writes, quote, "Seen from the redactional perspective, compared to 27 to 36, the defeat could be seen as Yahweh's judgment on the sin of the Elites, though this is not the conclusion the elders drew," end quote. Van Staldein Sulman notes that according to one Targum manuscript, MS Parma 3187, the people asked this question, not the elders. She writes that the manuscript blames the people for bringing the ark to the battle lines. A similar interpretation is found in Josephus in Antiquities 5353 and is implied by Pseudo-Philo in LAB 54.1. On the Ark of the Lord's Covenant, Tsumura notes that this phrase appears only in this chapter in Samuel. He writes that the Ark of the Lord's Covenant can be explained grammatically either as the Ark for the Covenant of Yahweh or the Ark of Covenant for symbolizing Yahweh, with the Ark of Covenant signifying, quote, the Ark for keeping the covenant tablets, end quote. Auld comments, quote, the Ark is a further theme found at just 2 points in BTH. David brings it into Jerusalem after his capture of the city, seen in 2 Samuel 6. Then Solomon installs it in the innermost sanctum of his new temple, 1 Kings 8. There is no further mention of it in the royal story, whether in BTH or in the successor books of Kings. The Ark too plays a larger role in 1 Samuel, a role now intertwined with the Philistines, as it does when the book of Joshua reports Israel's crossing the Jordan. In neither case can we have any confidence that this extrapolation backward in time from the data in BTH is historically valuable. As the Ark developed its prehistory with the passage of time, it also developed more elaborate titles. Throughout Samuel, we shall detect a greater preference in Masoretic text than in the Septuagint, for elaborate titles. Thus, the Vaticanus varies in verses 3 to 5 between attesting the Ark of our God, the Ark of Yahweh ruling the cherubim, and the Ark of Yahweh, but never includes the covenant, which is 4 times in the Masoretic text. On verse 4, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim. Hebrew for enthroned between the cherubim is Yoshev HaKeruvim, literally seated the cherubim, which doesn't really make sense. Klein writes that Yahweh's invisible dwelling on the cherubim, quote unquote, is mentioned for the first time with the Shiloh sanctuary, as we see in verse 4 and 2 Samuel 6:2. This iconography was perpetuated in Solomon's temple, as we see in 1 Kings 6, verses 12 through 29. He describes the cherubim as winged sphinx, quote unquote, and writes that their iconography may have been borrowed from the Canaanite god El, who is also depicted as sitting on a cherub throne. And Auld comments, the phrase Yoshev HaKerubim is rendered seated upon the cherubim in the Septuagint. But the Hebrew expression, which is found with Yahweh of hosts in 1 Samuel 6:2, 2 Kings 19:15, and Isaiah 37:16, and independent of Yahweh in Psalms 82, which is one in the Old Testament, and 99:1, includes no preposition corresponding to upon, and hence leaves the reader to deduce the relationship between the seated one and the cherubim. The cherubim will be depicted on temple panels close to the innermost sanctuary and, in sculpted form, within the inner sanctum. We may deduce that these beings have been among the closest members of Yahweh's entourage. They are almost certainly depicted with bodies of winged lions and with heads like either eagles or humans. Since their wings may function to conceal Yahweh, it may be preferable to understand the phrase to mean seated or enthroned between or among the cherubim. On verse 6, the Hebrew camp. Commentators write that the term Hebrew is used of Israelites by foreigners, as we see in Genesis 39:14 and 17, 41:12, and Exodus 1 verses 15 through 16, and by Israelites who, when they speak to foreigners regarding themselves, as we see in Genesis 40:15, Exodus 5:3, and Jonah 1:9. Shaul Abramski writes that this term preserves an alienation between the Israelites and foreigners. He also notes that the Philistines describe the Hebrews as slaves, in Hebrew avdu in verse 9, which might create a play on the words ever and eved, which means slave. Tsumura comments, the background and origin of this term is disputed, however. There are references in the second millennium to a group of people called Apiru, but there is no scholarly consensus about who they were or about their connection with the Hebrews, quote unquote.
Which I want to do a video on that whole thing and all the different hypotheses. But yeah, Apiru is a very, very interesting group.
Yeah, so they apparently were nomadic people living near cities who sometimes tried to seize land, or they were bands formed from various outcast groups. They were a social group, quote unquote, apparently made up of people who had abandoned urban life to become gypsies, quote unquote. Among them were probably escaped slaves, debtors, fugitives from lawsuits, and the generally disaffected. It may be that the terms Hebrew and chapiru, etc., are cognates and denote one who crossed over, quote unquote, from urban to nomadic life. A.R. Millard thinks that the biblical use derives from the second millennium use, which suits Joseph and others well, taking a more particular meaning when chabiru, in general, had disappeared from the Fertile Crescent at the end of the Late Bronze Age. On verse 7, a god has come into the camp. Hebrew for a god is Elohim. The term can refer to Yahweh, as we see in Vulgate, Peshitta, and Tsumura, or multiple gods, as we see in the Septuagint and most modern commentators. Arguing for the meaning God, capital G God, Tsumura writes that from the narrator's viewpoint, Elohim must be singular, and the verbal form ba, had come, is also singular. McCarter, however, writes that the plural is probably intended to indicate that the Philistines, themselves worshippers of several gods, assumed the same of the Israelites. He writes that while very little is known about Philistine religion, quote, it is clear that they eventually assimilated the culture of Palestine thoroughly, including the worship of Canaanite gods. The biblical writers associate the Philistines especially with the Semitic deity Dagon, who appears in 5:2. On verse 8, sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say they certainly did, but I seem to recall Lawrence mentioning that the Philistines didn't worship Dagon. They worshipped another god.
Oh, there was oh man, I forgot the note on that. That's the whole thing. I have to become more familiar with it. But I do remember quoting something like that, and I think I know exactly where it was from. So give me a second.
Okay.
Yeah, wasn't
We
it
can
that
come back to it.
Dagon was a Ugaritic god
Yeah.
that didn't
Yeah,
get appropriated by the...
yeah. That's essentially what it is. We've mentioned him in, like, I think in Judges, he's mentioned as well. Yeah. I think in the pantheon where Samson also appears, it's basically there.
Yeah, and also the whole idea of him being like a sea god or a fish god is also a mistake. Like the word Dagon has nothing to do with the Hebrew dag, meaning fish.
Yeah, it's more with the gun, which means grain.
Yeah, fish, grain. Yeah, grain god. And I think
Yeah,
the idea of the fish etymology is like, it's pretty late. I mean, like obviously we have like Jewish.
It's late.
And yeah, I think like Rashi mentions it, but
Also the
modern,
traditionals say it.
yeah, but then in modern scholarship they kind of got confused because of like there's like another thing called Odakon, which is
It's the argument about whether or not the Philistines were the sea people. Because
They're probably one group of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were like 9 groups of sea people. Yeah, so I believe what I was probably referencing was this book here. So the best illustration of the this is just in a citation. So about the deity Dagon, who plays no role in the published mythological text from Ugarit, and yet must be reckoned as one of the principal male deities of that city. So this is for Ugarit. In the light of his apparent significant place in the cultus at Ugarit, evidenced by the temple and stela dedicated to him. And then it goes on to say that Dagon appears in at least 2 of the texts to appear in Ugaritica 5, 1 mythological text and 1 list of deities. That Dagon also is a significant deity in South Canaan is well attested from the Old Testament, like in 1 Samuel 5. And then let's see. Yeah, thus inferences about the role of Dagon based only on the Ugaritic mythological text would be somewhat misleading. So this is just in a citation about the worship of the it was just about the status of certain gods in the area, but that was like in a citation.
Kip has
It's
a
hard to
comment
keep
as
track
well
of so many
on that.
gods.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, the classic picture that people sometimes think about, where they're like, oh, there's like a Sumerian looking guy with a fish tail, like a merman. Like that's actually just Mesopotamian Kululu or something like that.
Yeah, and if anyone's wondering where that's from, this is from a book called Israelite Religion and Biblical Theology. It's a book of essays from Patrick D. Miller.
Very interesting.
Okay, I'll continue. Or I see a comment by Kip. Maybe Aaron wants to read it first. 2 comments.
Yep.
We-
So Kip says there is no origin of animal sacrifice.
No, you read that one. You read?
Okay.
No, I don't think he did.
I don't.
No,
Did he?
no, he didn't.
I don't
didn't
remember.
I
read
don't
it.
remember
Didn't read
reading
Oh,
this one.
sorry. Yeah. I think I'm.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
There is no origin of animal sacrifice. It's just accepted as the practice of religion. This is the cultic landscape.
I would also say there is an origin. We just don't know what it is because it's probably it's prehistoric. So
There
we
had
have,
to be somebody to be the first one to do that. Hey, I just killed this thing to eat. Well, let's not eat it. Let's just pretend that a god eats it.
well, the thing is,
and
yeah,
then-
Probably
there are
started.
potential different hypotheses you could go. Like maybe it started out as like a medicinal
Giving it
thing because like,
hearts.
oh, if you kill this animal and then eat it, you feel better from something. And then they could have linked, instead of the eating part being the good part, they were like, oh, the sacrifice must have been it. Like that could have been a potential one. There's a whole bunch of them a whole bunch of hypotheticals. There
I'll
was
tell
an
you what I
origin.
think it
We just
is.
don't know what it is.
I think it is like when a child sits her teddy bear and her dolls around a little table with teacups and pretends to pour tea for everybody. That's what these ancient people are doing. They're setting a place at the table for their imaginary friend.
They
Yeah.
literally did, and there was with the pouring out of libations, as we've discussed previously, burning not necessarily the whole animal, but the sacred parts of the animal, meaning the fat, because that would burn to ash, which is a good sign, because then the deity actually ate whatever the hell you gave him, and possibly parts of the innards, depending on divination purposes and yada yada. So it's they're trying to share a meal with the divine beings, get them on side. It's like if you're trying to ask someone for a favor, so you invite them over to a nice dinner, butter them up a
Yeah,
bit.
I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think
giving,
in some
like-
contexts they're even feeding the gods,
yeah,
Totally.
which is really
and that's still practiced to this day. People do give like cooked foods to idols and stuff like that.
Yeah, but let's we can't use today's stuff to speculate on the origins. It's really difficult because getting to the origins of religion has been the most daunting task. We probably can't find an answer because it's all prehistoric. So there are no actual records of it, and it's just kind of us left with whatever scant archaeological evidence we have. So people can speculate. But yeah, no one really has a fucking clue when it
So
comes to the origins.
if we could find the origin of this tradition where they want to set a table, they want to kill a thing, but not eat the thing. Let's just waste the food and we'll pretend that this imaginary person is taking part in this meal with us, and then we can pretend we have a magic imaginary friend. Isn't that lovely? And then if because we are time travelers, we're going to go visit these people and we found this origin, and then one of us says, "Don't be stupid."
I also like.
And then
I
religion never existed.
I mean, you're also
I al-
forgetting let's slaughter a calf, but a cow. Like, let's not eat all of it. The priest needs to have the best bits. That's a sacrifice.
Yeah.
I
That's
also
another
like
one.
that. I also like that we're talking about animal sacrifices when no animal sacrifices were mentioned in these chapters.
Yeah,
It'll come
right.
up at some
That's
Okay,
true.
then-
Thus far, there hasn't been. Although one might assume there was an animal sacrifice before the battle. It's probable, not necessarily fully assumed, but it's highly probable they would have a sacrifice to be like, hey, come on, God.
I think what's being sacrificed here is Hophni and Phineas. That's why.
Ah,
You got people that
fair
are
point.
dying,
God will take his
so-
own sacrifice. How
They
delightful.
need to,
And,
they need to tease
ki-
God before the battle with like, here's some animals. We're gonna kill it if you win.
And then Kip adds, also, Dagon, the abomination of the Philistines, is the name of my
Did you read it?
Belgian...
You missed one on.
Did you read his first part of that comment?
I'm sorry, what?
Very few Ugaritic texts featuring Dagon, but these also appear to be very old. He seems to have been a very old god who passed out of contemporary usage.
Again, Dagon is not even mentioned here when we're talking
someone
about it.
talk about Dagon.
I did when I first mentioned it. When we'll get to chapter 5.
We'll get to Dagon, yeah. But...
All right, let's get back to
when
reading
I didn't
as
even-
quickly as
He
possible.
still has
Hopefully.
commentary.
I didn't even finish reading the comment. He said it. He said that the Dagon, the abomination of the Philistines, is the name of his Belgian Malinois. What is that? Is that dog breed?
Belgian Malinois.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
Belgian
Malinois.
Shepherd dog.
Yeah.
That's adorable. And it would have been funny
Malinois?
if Lawrence hadn't jumped in and said,
Arn, fun fact. Fun fact, if Falcor had
What's
been
that?
a Belgian Malinois, you wouldn't be able to build a fence high enough he couldn't get over it. Because these dogs can go up pretty high. They're used by police all over Europe. They can get everywhere.
Oh, okay. I'm not familiar with that breed. M. Doug says he offers 10 pounds and says, "There's not a Dagon by that. There's not a Dagon by that. The Philistines don't regret stealing Yahweh's ride.
Good, very good. I
A
like that
Dagon by
A Dagon
Yeah, I
by.
like
Yep.
And then Kip says, Lawrence is right. We just don't know.
And I don't think it had one cause. I think it's childish and honestly a bit religious in thinking to think that anything so immersed in human societies and cultures ever only had one cause or one purpose it was fulfilling.
True. Let's not fall into that hyper diffusion.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what you tell kids when you're just trying to get them in on the basic ideas, but it's always complex, and there's always many fish in the fire coming together.
Okay.
Go ahead, Tsumura.
I'll continue. On verse 8, they are the gods who struck the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness. Several commentators see this clause as problematic, since the Egyptian plagues occurred in Egypt and not in the wilderness. Septuagint, followed by Kara, Gersonides, Titrani, and Auld, add the conjunction, quote, who struck down the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues and in the wilderness, end quote, in Hebrew, Vebamidbar, with the traditionals writing that this refers to the Red Sea crossing. Others, like Joseph Kimchi, Ibn Kaspi, and Abravanel, interpret Bamidbar in the wilderness as mouth, based on Song of Songs 4:3, quote, your mouth v'mitbarech is lovely, end quote, and write that God struck the Egyptians with plagues through his words. McCarter and Klein, following Wellhausen and Driver, suggest amending Bamidbar to Badever, which means pestilence. Bar-Efrat writes that the Philistines are simply mistaken and are confusing between Egypt and the wilderness. Likewise, Tsumura writes that the Masoretic text's imprecise expression might support the idea that the Philistines heard about the Lord's saving acts both in Egypt and in the wilderness. And Targum reads, these are the mighty deeds of the Lord who smote the Egyptians with every plague, but did for his people wonders in the wilderness, end quote.
It is in line with the idea that, if a rumor is passed on of the great deeds of this God that everyone is so shocked by, and their ears are buzzing, that they would get things a bit mixed up. That's how rumors work. But the idea being that, everyone feared this God because they heard, about that thing that totally never happened.
Now, and finally, on that section, 30,000 foot soldiers. Several commentators see this number as exaggerated. Bar-Efrat writes that the number is used to emphasize the greatness of the Israelites' defeat. McCarter argued that the word for 1,000, elef, denotes some kind of military unit of unspecified size. Citing G.E. Mendenhall, he writes that the elef unit varied in size from 5 men per unit to over 14 men per unit. Thus, he argued that the Israelites' losses are estimated to be between 150 and 420 infantry men, in addition to the casualties suffered in the first engagement, in verse 2. And that's it for this part of the commentary.
Okay, I will
Alright,
jump back
Arn,
into reading.
I believe you can. Yeah, continue.
All right. So verse 12, I think, is where we're at.
Mhm.
Yes. A man of Benjamin ran from the battle line and came to Shiloh the same day, with his clothes torn and the earth upon his head. That's interesting. When he arrived, Eli was sitting upon his seat by the road watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. When the man came to the city, he told the news, and all the city cried out. When Eli heard the sound of the outcry, he said, "What is this uproar?" Then the man came quickly and told Eli. And now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were set so that he could not see. The man said to Eli, whatever, "I have just come from the battle. I fled from the battle today," he said. "How did it go, my son?" The messenger replied, "Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has also been great slaughter. Among the troops, your 2 sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured." When we mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backward from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died. For he was an old man and heavy. He had judged Israel 40 years. Now, his daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant, about to give birth. When she heard the news that the ark of God was captured and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed and gave birth. For her labor pains overwhelmed her. And as she was about to die, the women attending her said to her, "Do not be afraid, for you have borne a son." But she did not answer or give heed. She named the child Ichabod, meaning "the glory has departed from Israel," because the ark of God has been captured, and because her father-in-law and her husband, because the ark of God has been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. She said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured."
Yeah, so kavod meaning glory or honor, and as like a separate prefix word meaning like not.
It depends. I mean, you can
Okay,
read
yeah,
it
it does
as like
depend.
ayekavod, as like where is the glory?
Where is it? Yeah, that's true as well. Yeah, it can mean where, or it can mean not. Yeah.
Although Septuagint has wo bar kaboth, which we'll get to.
Oh.
That's an entirely different name.
Yeah. Okay, I think I should start. First on verse 12. So, a Benjaminite. According to Midrash Shmuel 11:1, this was Saul who grabbed the tablets of stones from the hands of Goliath and fled the battlefield. And there's also a discussion there about how many miles he ran. Don't you love it?
Much
Like a
military
marathon.
belief.
Well, the identification of the man as Saul is also found in Pseudo-Philo, LAB 54, sections 3-4, Midrash Tehillim 7:2, and Rashi. Van Staldein Sulman notes that in a marginal expansion of one Targum manuscript, Codex Roichelinianus, Saul was aided by an angel. Kimchi and Abravanel, however, wrote that it is unlikely that a person can take out the tablets from the ark, given that anybody who touches the ark dies. Klein notes Stobe's opinion that the narrator, quote, offers the reader a subtle clue that leadership in Israel is passing over from the Shiloh priesthood to Saul, by noting that Saul's tribesman brings the dread news to Eli. Yeah.
So foreshadowing.
You could say, maybe, yeah. Now on verse 15, Bar-Efrat writes that the purpose of mentioning Eli's age and his blindness is to explain what happened to Eli after being informed. Eli can't see the torn up clothes of the man standing in front of him, nor the dirt upon his head, and so the bad news come to him as a surprise. The shock and his high unstable age cause him to fall from his chair and break his neck. Tsumura cites R.P. Gordon that the reference to Eli's age and eyesight at this point, quote, slows up the movement of the story, just as it probably was intended to do, end quote. Therefore, quote, to treat the verse as interpolative is to miss the point, Pace, Smith, and McCarter. On verse 16, I have just come from the battle line. I fled from it this day. Hebrew Bible reads, I am the one who came to the battlefield, Hama'aracha, and I, from the battlefield, Hama'aracha, fled today. Garsiel writes that it seems that the messenger is unable to inform Eli about the calamity, and so provides a long introduction with double wordings. Bar-Efrat writes that the repetition hints to the messenger's embarrassment. Tsumura writes, quote, the repetitious expression with variation of the first-person personal pronouns reflects the real situation when someone tries to explain something to a totally blind person. On verse 18, his neck was broken. Hebrew for his neck is mafrakto, which is a hapax. The word is derived from mifreket, and Vulgate, Targum, and Peshitta render it neck, which is a reading favored by McCarter, Klein, and Tsumura. Rashi and Kimchi read the bone of the neck, deriving mifreket from perek, which means link or part, i.e. the vertebra of which the bones of the neck and spine are made. Septuagint reads back, and Auld reads skull. On that same verse, he had led Israel 40 years. Masoretic text reads, he judged Israel for 40 years. McCarter writes that this notice is intended to incorporate Eli's career into the chronological framework of the preceding material, i.e. Judges. He notes that the attribution of Eli the priest as a judge has puzzled scholars. Although Hans Wilhelm Herzberg restored his name to the list of the minor judges of Judges 10 and 12, McCarter writes that the present notice is a Deuteronomistic expansion, and every major figure between Joshua and Saul was a judge, quote-unquote, from the Deuteronomistic point of view. Klein, however, notes Knoth's opinion that this notice is from someone later than the original Deuteronomistic historian. He writes, quote, this glossolater, who is to be dated after the division of the age into the separate books of Judges, Samuel, etc., wanted to include Eli as the predecessor of Samuel in the list of judges. According to Knoth, Eli's 40-year tenure as judge would have to include the first 20 years of the Philistine oppression and the time of Samson in Judges 13:1, 15:20, and 16:31, as well as the period of the last three judges mentioned in Judges 12 verses 8 through 15. But such overlapping judges are unknown elsewhere in DH, end quote. Bar-Efrat writes that the number 40 is a typological number, indicating years of one generation, as seen in the repeated phrase, and the land was quiet for 40 years in Judges. Septuagint has Eli ruling for 20 years. Klein writes that this is an even later correction by the Septuagint, meant to place Eli in the first half of the period of Philistine oppression, without overlapping with Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon, who are found in Judges 12 verses 8 through 15. And assigning the second 20 years of oppression to the period the ark stayed in Kiryat Yarim in 1 Samuel 7:2. All other translations and Josephus in Antiquities 5:359 has him ruling for 40 years.
That's interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
he was very old. So,
He was.
so like, even if it was only 40 years, like, he would
Yeah.
have been quite old when he started.
Although we
Yeah.
have noted that 40 years can often be used to denote
Yeah.
a generation or the fullness of time or something other than a literal technical 40 years. So,
Now, on verses 19 through 22, McCarter comments, the relationship of the account of the birth of Ichabod to the section as a whole is difficult to determine. It is not really an organic part of the report of Eli's death and seems to have no necessary function in the larger story. It does serve to assure us that the line of Eli is not already blotted out after the death of the old man and his sons. But we later learn in 14:3, where Saul's chaplain Achia, son of Achitub, is identified as Ichabod's brother, that Phinehas had another son anyway. It is probably best to regard these verses as representative of a separate unit of tradition included in the ark narrative, not because it was necessary to the author's purpose, but because it was familiar. On verse 21, Ichabod, in Hebrew Ichabod, the word is usually denoted either as there is no glory, reading en kavod, as we see in Josephus in Antiquities 5360 and Rashi, or where is the glory, aye kavod, according to Kimchi and modern commentators. McCarter notes the Ugaritic e, or I, meaning where is or alas. Likewise, Jezebel, in Hebrew Izevel, should be understood as where is the prince, aye Zevel, or Zevul, where prince refers to Baal. Septuagint reads, woe Bar-Kabath. Auld writes that the Septuagint interposes Bar between the other two elements and may be a truncated element of some form of the Greek baris, which means heavy. And finally, on verse 22, this verse repeats the etymology of the name Ichabod, already given in the previous verse. Kimchi writes that for the first etymology, she mentions the ark and her husband and brother-in-law, but now she mentions only the ark, as for it was the main glory, quote-unquote. Bar-Efrat notes that in the case of Rachel, after she gives birth to Joseph, a double etymology is given for the boy's name in Genesis 30, verses 23 to 24. While each etymology there is different, here it is the same one, with the emphasis being on the ark of the Lord. That's it for my commentary.
Okay, should we move to the Samuel 5?
Yes, but I should note, I've just seen a funny ancient Christian commentary. So first I'll read the summary from Jerome. A bishop's chastity must extend to his children.
Wait,
I'm guessing this is supposed to be a commentary on
at what
Eli
point did he
and his
become
son.
a bishop? At what point did he become chaste?
Well, I'll read it. I'll read his quotation. I'll read his quote. This is from Against Jovinianus 135. See what chastity is required in a bishop. If his child is unchaste, he himself cannot be a bishop, and he offends God in the same way as did Eli the priest, who had indeed rebuked his sons, but because he had not put away the offenders, fell backwards and died before the lamp of God went out.
Because remember, the only sin that Christians care about is sex.
What's with the little addition at the end, before the lamp of the Lord went out? Is that supposed to be him trying to be poetic or something? Like, it's so random.
I have no idea. Maybe
It's-
like
It seems to
it's
be-
his interpretation.
Like, it's
Kip,
related to
that-
the beginning of the chapter, but like
That phrase was
very
used. Yeah, I think it's possible that refers to some cultic practice that was known to occur at Shiloh at some point when this was written, but was no longer continuing.
Oh, and he
and
also
just wondering why this Christian from much later decided to bring that into the story of him dying, when it's to do with like the nighttime in the temple, being able to see things.
That's an
like,
Origin type who would be like, who'd just say that the light that went out is Jesus, or the presence of God that was for the Jewish people once they were superseded by the true church, because this entire religion and history and people are all just a prequel to us. Aren't we wonderful?
Yeah.
Oh, and I should also know that he wrote in a different text regarding Ichabod. The pain of giving birth, which is likened to the pain of hell, is rarely associated with holy women in Scripture.
Oh, right. Holy women don't have pain during childbirth. So, is he trying to imply that this woman was not holy because she felt pain?
Or was she more holy because she was mourning for the loss of the ark more than for the loss of her husband and father-in-law?
He first writes that the wife of Phinehas, who was bent over and could not stand erect, like the woman who the devil bound in the gospel, Luke 13:10-16, gave birth after she had heard that the Ark of God was captured and her people were destroyed. But Sarah, because she was holy and postmenopausal, said to Isaac when he was born, God has made me laughter for me. For whoever hears about this will congratulate me. The pains, therefore, which overcame the tower of the flock, Genesis 35:21 and Micah 4:8, are the pains of hell and the pains of death, which surrounded and attacked even the Savior, but were never able to overtake him, as he himself says in Psalm 17:5.
Wow. Okay.
That's a lot of
So
pulling from a lot of places. What a cherry picker.
What
I
drugs
think it's
did
just
they have
pulling
in
from one
medieval Europe?
place.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you,
I'll go ahead
Jerome.
and read. Go ahead and read 1 Samuel 5. Right. When the Philistines captured the ark of God, they brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it into the house of Dagon and placed it beside Dagon. When the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, there was Dagon fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and put him back in his place. But when they rose early the next morning, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. And the head of Dagon was both his hands, the head of Dagon and both his hands were lying cut off upon the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. This is why the priests of Dagon and all those who enter the house of Dagon do not step on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. The hand of the Lord was heavy upon the people of Ashdod, and he terrified and struck them with tumors, both in Ashdod and in its territory. And when the inhabitants of Ashdod saw how things were, they said, "The ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is heavy on us, and our God Dagon." So they sent and gathered together all of the lords of the Philistines and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel?" The inhabitants of Gath replied, "Let the ark of God be moved on to us." So they moved the ark of the God of Israel to Gath. But after they brought it to Gath, the hand of the Lord was against the city, causing a very great panic. He struck the inhabitants of the city, both young and old, so that tumors broke out on them. And they sent the ark of the God of Israel to Ekron. But when the ark of the God came to Ekron, the people of Ekron cried out, "Why have they brought around to us the ark of the God of Israel to kill us and our people?" They sent therefore and gathered together all of the lords of the Philistines and said, "Send away the ark of the God of Israel and let it return to its own place, that it may not kill us and our people." For there was a deathly panic throughout the whole city. The hand of God was heavy there, very heavy there. And those who did not die were stricken with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven.
Yes, there's quite a bit about this. So yeah, they take this, put it into the temple of Dagon, and one of the primary ideas in the ancient world when a cultic object like a statue, for example, was desecrated, this was a way to maim, hurt or even kill gods. And in I know that in Egypt, not that long before this narrative would have been written, there was this idea of if you destroy like somebody's image after their death, that actually kills them in the afterlife. So it might have a similar root. And the fact that this is it kind of shows you the limits of the presence of God, shows you the limits of the glory of the Lord, because they are worried that he's going to bring destruction to everybody, but so far he's only been able to basically tip over a statue. So it's interesting that he had not kind of done something more special. kind of shows you to me that shows the limits of this cult object and what it was thought. But the people, the Philistines, would not have had that same idea. But either way, I did want to quickly note the use of the tumors there. Now, sometimes it's translated as hemorrhoids. In fact, the next
Yeah,
I know.
Oh yeah, I've seen that one.
Yeah,
in
it
fact,
appear-
in the next chapter, we're gonna have some golden hemorrhoids.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that is a translation thing. So I want to note this.
How do you
Yeah,
cast
and-
a golden hemorrhoid? Did someone have to be the
Right.
model?
Listen, I understand the confusion there. So
Yeah.
hopefully
It's interesting
this
that they left
comment-
it. I would have thought that the Christian versions would include the extra bits from the Septuagint, with that they had hemorrhoids and mice.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
Because that's
it was
because
usually thought to be whatever this was thought to be like transported by mice or something like that.
but that also because chapter 6 mentions golden mice as well.
that too.
Right,
I sh-
but if the Septuagint has those two verses have an extra bit that says "and mice in their fields" or something like that, and it's interesting that these translations don't include them. It's almost like they've gone back to the Masoretic or something.
It was a
Um,
long time ago that I had this conversation, but I remember hearing about the hemorrhoids thing and wanting then to have an original Hebrew translation to explain what the fuck they were talking about.
Well, the thing is, when it comes to these different manuscripts, right? Like, we don't have any originals, so we kind of have to do like some actual work to figure out what was most likely the original reading and what reading could explain all the other readings. But hopefully, this comment from Robert Alter helps. Many translators render this as hemorrhoids, and there is a little confusion in the Masoretic text. The consonantal written version, Ketiv, has tumors, but
Afalim.
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
but the tradition for reciting the text, Keri,
Kere.
thank you, Tomer, indicates hemorrhoids. This confusion
Polim.
is compounded because the Septuagint, seconded by Josephus, includes a plague of mice not in
Yeah.
evidence in the Masoretic version, and the
Yeah.
golden mice of the next chapter look very much like a response to just such a plague. The fact, moreover, that hemorrhoids are a humiliating but not lethal disorder are not spread by epidemic, whereas the Philistines' protest that they are dying gives support to an interpretation, at least as old as Rashi. The plague in question is bubonic plague carried by rats, metamorphosed in this story into
Well-
mice and associated with the epidemic, but perhaps not clearly understood as the bearers of the disease. The tumors are the I don't know how to pronounce this. Is it bubos? I don't know. Bubos? I don't know. Of
Bubos.
bubonic plague,
Bubos,
which might especially afflict the lower body, including the rectal area.
Although I will
Yeah.
say that Rashi and
Yeah.
and also Kara have a very explicit description of what
Yeah.
the rats were doing to the mice
Nice.
were doing to this, and I'll get to that.
Yeah,
I
okay,
should also note that it is the hemorrhoids do appear in Deuteronomy 28:27 as the exact like Kere and Ketiv. So
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
yeah,
You guys should also hear the one from Hello, because that's crazy.
Hello.
Yeah,
Hellas.
yeah, the Hebrew Aramaic
Yeah.
lexicon. They say
Yeah.
the layer of subcutaneous fat around the testicles, perineum, wild growth of tissue in the vulva, thickening of the flesh in the anus,
Mhm.
not equivalent to the Akkadian uplu, which does not mean boil. Head louse, connected with the verb upulu, to the louse.
Yeah, I mean they read the afalim here, and I've also read one interpretation where afal is understood from Arabic, which mean hill or something like that. Comparison, but I'll get to that. It's a very interesting verse.
Yeah.
Okay,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
We have a comment from Argspid who says, "So God gets captured and decides to be a citywide pain in the arse."
Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll start reading on verse 1. Philistines had captured the Ark of God. Tsumura writes that the practice of capturing an enemy's god was common in warfare in the ancient Near East and is mentioned in several ancient Near Eastern texts. He writes that it was understood that the people whose gods were in enemy hands were completely conquered. In verse
Yeah, that
2,
makes sense.
in verse 2 about Dagon, traditional commentators like Rashi and Kimchi derive the name Dagon from Dag, which means fish, and understood Dagon to be a half human, half fish deity. However, modern commentators take Dagon to be the god Dagan, a Mesopotamian grain deity. Tsumura writes that Dagan was a major deity in Ebla and Mari, and was the head of Emar's pantheon. In Ugarit, Dagan was the father of the storm god Baal. The Philistines adopted Dagon to their pantheon, presumably sometime after their arrival, but how soon is not known. In the Bible, Dagon is the Philistines' national god, as in Judges 16:23 and 1 Chronicles 10:10.
Wait, who is that from?
Tsumura.
But she doesn't source the. He doesn't source the where the idea that the Philistines did. Like, is there any sources that Philistines actually worship Dagon at all? Or is it
Yes.
just assumed? So.
No, he is adopted. Like that's what I've read from commentators that like they've adopted Dagon. It's not like their national god.
But I'm saying outside of the Bible, what do we have to say that that's true?
I have a couple books that I could check on that, but they are upstairs.
I mean, I
couldn't find
like,
anything. That's what I'm saying. I remember looking into this. I didn't find anything that said the Philistines actually had any connection to Dagon. It's just the Bible that says it.
Yeah, that might be totally true.
Well, I'll check on this later. Okay. They set it beside Dagon. What was the purpose behind this act? Rabbi Yochanan in Midrash Shmuel 11:4 said that they have honored Yahweh, saying, quote, "This is a god and this is a god. Let the god, i.e. Yahweh, come and live with a god, i.e. Dagon," end quote. Likewise, Klein writes that by placing the ark beside Dagon, the Philistines seem to have been honoring Yahweh, as if he had abandoned his own people to acknowledge the power and superiority of their god. This, however, does not explain why the Philistines were punished. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, the Philistines said, quote, "This, i.e. Dagon, is the victor, and this, i.e. Yahweh, is the defeated. Let the defeated come and be a slave to the victor," end quote. Likewise, Tsumura writes, quote, "In this way, the Israelite Yahweh was supposed to have come under the control of Dagon, the god of the conqueror," end quote. On verse 3, Dagon fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. McCarter describes Dagon, quote, "lying prostrate before the ark in a position of adoration," end quote. Klein writes that Dagon's first prostration before the ark, quote, "would seem to indicate his worship of Yahweh and the acknowledgement of his superiority." Compare Genesis 17 verses 3 and 17, end quote. Tsumura writes, quote, "The narrator might be hinting that the real issue here is warfare between two deities," end quote. On verse 4, his head and hands had been broken off. Bar-Efrat writes that without a head or hands, Dagon has no ability to act. Garsiel notes that cutting the head and hands by the victor is a physical symbol of victory over the enemy, as we see in Judges 7:25, 1 Samuel 17:46, 51, and 54. An Ugaritic text, which describes Anat's wars against her enemies, tells of Anat carrying the hands and heads of her defeated enemies, as we see in Anat, page 136. Septuagint has the following addition, quote, "each upon the front parts of Amapheth, and both wrists of his hands fallen in the doorway." And Auld comments, and probably Lawrence will help me with the Greek, it must be nearly certain that the Vaticanus has conflated two renderings of the Masoretic texts about Dagon's separated parts. The first use ichnos, or iknos, more common in Greek for the sole of the foot, for kaf, which Hebrew uses for both sole and palm, and Hamiftan is both translated in the Septuagint as the four parts, and then transliterated from Hebrew in the transliterated from Hebrew. In the second, Septuagint uses kalpos, including the consonants of kaf, which means fallen, corresponds only freely to cut off, but it has already been used twice in the shared context, verses 3 and 4. The Lucenic recension is similar to the Vaticanus, but offers feet after soles, and ton stathmon instead of amapheth, after epi ta emprostia. In both cases, these appear to be sensible editorial corrections, quote unquote, of a text whose strangeness had been due to conflation. Now, on that same verse, only his body remained. In Hebrew, rak dagon nishar alav, literally, only dagon remained on him. Kimchi writes that dagon, quote unquote, refers to the fish image of the statue, which was from the navel downwards, while from the navel upwards, it was a human. He writes that, quote, only dagon remained, quote, end quote, means only the fish image remained. Likewise, Wellhausen proposed to read rak dago, only his fish, but this proposal has not found wide acceptance. McCarter notes that most critics would restore go dagon, dagon's trunk, as we see according to Klein, or simply gavo, his trunk, according to Bar-Efrat. Septuagint has only Dagon's spine was left. Vulgate has only the stump of Dagon remained. And the Targum and Peshitta read, his body was left to him. And Van Stalda and Sulman comments, it is questionable whether the ancient versions had a different vorlage. First, the context itself indicates that the torso of Dagon is intended, as Matthias Delcor has rightly observed. Secondly, the ancient versions clearly chose their own interpretations. Vulgate chose the most technical interpretation, Dagon truncus. Most probably, the Septuagint used the word rakis for its similarity to the Hebrew rak, thus rendering this word twice, only the back. Targum's Jonathan and Peshitta translated the word by his body because of the similarity to the description of the body of King Saul in 1 Samuel 31, 9-10, where Saul's head is cut off and his body fastened to the wall of Bet Sha'an. For this reason, the different renderings of the ancient versions can be explained as interpretations of the difficult reading Dagon. on verse 5, the previous verses serve as an etiology for the practice described in verse 5. Bar-Efrat writes that since the practice of not stepping on the threshold exists till this day, quote unquote, it serves to authenticate the story, since the readers could check it out for themselves. Traditional commentators like Kara, Gersonides, and Abravanel wrote that this practice was done because Dagon was left on the threshold, and so it was wholly on itself. And Klein comments, a person stepping on a threshold might put pressure on the heads of the spirits or demons contained in it, and irritate them so much that they would inflict evil on the offender. To avoid this, superstitious people might step or leap over the threshold, a practice roundly condemned as pagan by the prophet Zephaniah 1:9, though presumably practiced by some of his Israelite contemporaries. Respect for the threshold gods, then, would seem to be a plausible reason why the Dagon priests avoided the threshold of their god's temple. But the etiology in verse 5 provides a different popular explanation. The threshold had become taboo because the severed hands of Dagon had landed on it.
Yeah,
Don't step on a crack or you'll break your mother's back.
I mean, what are the chances that the person, when they wrote this, that there was a temple to Dagon in Ashdod where they did this? Seems like it's an etiology, but it doesn't feel like a true etiology.
I don't know what the probability
it's almost
is.
like they were trying to,
I'm not sure. Like I said, I'd have to look into, because I'm sure we've
Interesting.
fucking excavated a good amount of it, so or at least part of it, right? So I'll take a look. I have a couple, archaeology books I can look into for this region. So
I mean, it could have just been the writers like trying to follow a pattern of, other stories containing etiologies. So let's put one in here that
if there
sounds
was already, the not stepping on a threshold, if that was something that people did a lot,
it could have been a
you would-
general thing. Yeah.
yeah, you could then,
Um,
blame it on because our God was so badass, he dismembered the other God and dishonored.
Oh yeah,
him
that's
forever.
definitely part of it. Yeah.
McCarter writes that Philistine custom seems to have survived into the 1st centuries AD.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but
Yeah, so it
besides
makes sense that it
Delcor,
would. Yeah, so I'm saying it probably was just like a general thing and not stepping over the threshold, and in other cultures and stuff, and then the Bible's trying to, its etiology is saying that this comes from the Temple of Dagon, and the reason why the Temple of Dagon did it is because of the story.
Because our God is a badass.
he is. Okay, on verse 6, tumors. Okay, yeah. I've selected. I'm using the NIV for the translations, at least for the commentaries. So in the Masoretic text, the Ketiv has afalim and the Kirei reads techorim. These words appear in 6 verses 4 and 5 and Deuteronomy 28:27. As noted in the commentary on Deuteronomy, the word afalim was probably considered an offensive word and was replaced by techorim, which was more euphemistic. Septuagint has, and it broke out upon them into ships, and in the midst of its territory mice grew up, and there was great confusion of death in the city, end quote. Some traditional commentators also incorporated mice with the disease. Rashi, for instance, writes, quote, mice would enter the recta, disembowel them, and crawl out.
Whoa!
You could tell he was an animal rights activist, Rashi, because he was like, yeah, we have to get out of there.
Wow.
Okay, what? But there is Kara,
But
who is Kara is more explicit here.
even
And
more.
this,
Okay.
this is my translation. I might have screwed up some things, but again, medieval commentators are hard to understand. So he writes, when one of them went to his knees, i.e. Philistine, a mouse came, pulled down his intestines, and left. What would a Philistine do at that time? When one of them went to his needs, he would bring a vessel and do his needs on it, thinking that the vessel separates between him and the mouse. But the mouse comes, pierces the vessel, goes up, pulls the top of his intestines, and leaves. When the top of his intestines were punctured and he was defecating, the Hebrew is shlichuto shel makom, maybe, I have no idea, the mouse entered.
I think these mice were on cocaine.
They were like,
Was
they
this
saw a hemorrhoid
Mighty
and they're like,
Mouse?
yep.
So he gets a chamber pot, and the mouse, like Kill Bill style, just punches through it and rips out. Okay, yeah, that.
They
And then
never
that-
saw the mouse. They just
Sure.
saw the aftermath.
He goes. The mouse not only busts through the vessel, and we don't know what that's made of, whether it's made of pottery or whether it's made of bronze, whatever. Either way, kind of a challenge for a mouse. Just a big old, but probably even worse than that is, look, there's an asshole above me. It's taking a shit. I should climb through the shit into that asshole. That's, of all the things in the Bible, I mean, at least mice are real, and I'm still having problems believing that. Is there
I feel
any
like it
part
would
of
be
the
more
Bible that's
believable.
believable?
It would be
I mean,
more
it's not-
believable if it was a
They
beaver.
didn't tell you about the mice that escaped Krypton long before Superman.
The whole thing that Aaron just said there, someone should definitely take it out of context.
Yeah, I think the story would make more sense with a beaver, because then it'd be like,
With a what?
unblocking something.
A
Beaver.
beaver.
Because they make dams and stuff. They unblock.
Oh, a
rivers,
beaver.
You just saw a
Okay.
blockage and had to go in and fix it.
No, now Josephus in Antiquities 6:3 describes the
Sorry, I'm just having a moment with Isaac's shit beavers.
I mean, they do use their own feces to create their dams.
But there's a noticeable difference between having a mouse go up your ass and a beaver.
That's true.
You know, at
Yeah.
some point, the difference isn't noticeable.
Yeah.
What if you're
Okay.
picking gear?
Well, I was thinking
Yeah.
more like
Okay.
Oh, nothing.
I
You
think
know,
if
the
there's
only
one thing we could all
weirder-
agree is that things were much hairier back then, at the very least.
Oh God! The only thing worse than scripture are the
How can this book
commentaries.
continue
Oh
to
my
get this much
God.
worse?
Well, the commentaries. It's just context always makes
Yeah.
it worse.
And I
Yeah.
love
Were you
that. I
saying
love
the
that the
only thing-
commentaries. The commentaries are all embarrassingly stupid. That's the thing that it impresses me.
Not
The-
all of
the-
them.
the-
The traditionals.
oh,
Yeah, the traditional ones. Yeah, because the thing is, they have to like a lot of the time they have to act as apologists too, right?
Mhm.
And
Yes.
like they have to like answer complicated questions like why what's all this about tumors and hemorrhoids, and they're like, oh well, I have an explanation for you.
I have a
Uh,
question.
so-
I would like to know if anyone on earth can find another discipline or situation or job that has created as much ridiculous bullshit as apologetics.
Philosophy.
I you know what? Philosophy has brought around some really intense contortions,
astrologers.
but it has never ever had to contrive an
Oh,
a Kryptonian
Astrology?
mouse.
Well, mathematics can be a little
What
bullshit.
about like an astrology
Not
slash
bizarre.
crystal salesperson?
I mean, I'm having trouble with
How does
how
that?
old are these traditional interpretations?
medieval?
Medieval.
Yeah.
The generally
Medieval, okay.
generally from 11th century to 15th, 16th century.
Okay, so they're trying to
Yeah.
explain this, and the only thing they can come up with is mice because they don't. Maybe they know about fleas, but they don't know about diseases. So
And they think
And
they would have
so-
thought both of those were
It-
spontaneously. What's the word? Not.
yes, the damnation of God.
But you
Yeah,
know,
they're both a curse.
biogenesis, but spontaneously generated.
Well, that's
Yeah.
why. But that's
well,
why
the
we started
abiogenesis
worshiping
and spontaneous. Hold on a second.
Not
Abiogenesis and
abiogenesis.
abiogenesis and spontaneous generation are not the same thing.
Yeah. So I mean,
Us.
not abiogenesis, but biogenesis.
Wait, well, hold on,
Okay.
hold on.
Yeah.
Arn, I learned from Kent Hovind that spontaneous generation was disproven a long time ago. Therefore, abiogenesis, which is synonymous, cannot be true.
Yeah.
Are you
because
telling
those
me
are-
that
said,
Kent
I
Hovind
learned from
lied to
Kent
me?
Hovind, you lied. Nobody has
Yeah, I
ever
will
learned
tell-
anything from Kent Hovind.
for the audience who may not know, if you pick up a dictionary, just a regular dictionary, they will almost invariably tell you that abiogenesis and spontaneous generation are the same thing. They are in fact not. I've tried to contact at least 4 dictionaries regarding this point, and of course nobody will even discuss correcting this definition.
I mean,
But
dictionaries are descriptive, so if people are using the word in that sense, then that is one of the meanings.
That is true.
Yeah.
I feel
So you have to
Unfortunately, that
stress
is
that the
how dictionaries work.
scientifically, abiogenesis, the scientific
The
concept is different.
understanding is exacerbated by its usage in this way.
yeah,
Right.
so what we're
Which-
talking about, assuming there was any reality to this at all, we're not necessarily not necessarily hemorrhoid specifically. There is a symptom of boils or tumors or whatever you want to call it that all these people are getting, and the more likely culprit is going to be an airborne pathogen. But of course, they didn't understand airborne pathogens back then, so now they have to come up with something ridiculous like mighty mice, mighty anal fixating eating mice.
well,
It was the trauma of Krypton blowing up. It just made them
I
really
think I wonder if it's down to that whole bit where like because the Masoretic is missing the bits where it says mice in the fields, and then later on it talks about golden mice. That oh my god, for some reason my earphones are like whistling at me. Maybe this one's dead. Because there's only one verse in the Masoretic that talks about the golden mice. So maybe they were trying to reconcile, like, what's the connection between mice and hemorrhoids, and they're like, oh yeah, it's because the mice would go in and cause them, rather than, you know, just that those were two separate plagues happening at the same time, which is what you kind of get from the Septuagint. So,
and I think I was going to say earlier, that's why we started worshiping cats, which is the smartest thing we ever worshipped. In Egypt, they, you know, people may not have understood about pathogens and fleas, but you could make the connection that less vermin meant more food and less disease. You know, that is an observation that humans can make. And yeah, if you think that this is a God that smites with plagues, and you see both of these things, you could associate them as we're being cursed, even if actually it's just that you've got a disease-ridden rat pack running through your. But who knows? Maybe the disease-ridden rat lives in the ark. Maybe that's what his job is.
I think there is somebody, I can't remember who said it, that the ark is radioactive.
Sure.
Have you heard of this idea?
One of the first
That's why
apologetics.
touching it kills you, and you can't look at it.
It sounds familiar. I don't know where I've heard it.
It's
It sounds like fucking bullshit is what it sounds like.
Well,
I
yeah,
think
but
I think I've read it from one commentary. I can't tell exactly from whom, but I think we're getting off topic.
I mean, the idea of a lead-lined box with some naturally
Peter.
occurring,
Doesn't really work.
what they called, reactor inside, maybe.
Well, it had to be lead-lined, otherwise the super mice would see through it.
I actually haven't finished my commentary. Yeah, it was yeah. Thank you, Peter. Okay, so Josephus in Antiquities 6.3 describes the disease as dysentery, which he describes as, quote, a severe suffering and one bringing quick disintegration even before the soul was separated from the body by a welcome death. For they vomited up their insides that had been consumed and completely destroyed by the disease. A swarm of mice likewise came up over the country from beneath. They ravaged it, leaving neither plants nor crops untouched, end quote. And Gersonides describes the disease as a very sorrowing disease and much blood came out of them, end quote. And now Tsumura, he writes, the plague was certainly endemic to coastal areas, quote, where infected rats might arrive by ship, end quote, as McCarter writes, and, quote, a connection between rats and pestilence was recognized in early times, end quote. However, the Masoretic text does not mention mice until 6 verses 4-5, where golden mice are mentioned as the images of tumors. As McCarter rightly notes, quote, the narrator of the present account is not suggesting any causal relationship between the mice and the misery of the Philistines, for he credits the afflictions of Israel's enemies solely to Yahweh, end quote. The golden mice, quote unquote, were then probably made not because mice or rats were the cause of pestilence, but because tumors and mice have a similarity in form. This view may be supported by John B. Geyer, who concludes that only one, quote-unquote, plague is involved here, one of tumors, and that the mice were, quote, an offering to the deity, end quote, but never a plague, quote-unquote.
Wait, similar in form? Could you repeat that for me?
You know,
yeah,
hemorrhoids and mice.
The golden mice were then probably made not because mice or rats were the cause of pestilence, but because tumors and mice have a similarity in form.
Similarity in form.
I don't know. I'm not really an expert in tumors. Can a doctor just let us know how frequently tumors resemble mice?
Well, I think more elaborate. I've read this. I think in chapter 6, it elaborates on it more. Like there is a certain like connection between the mice and the tumors. I think I've read one that says that the tumors were. I can remember. When we get to chapter 6, then maybe. Yeah.
Oh yeah, because that sounds like a hell of a stretch to me.
Yeah. Did any of your commentary talk about in verse 6 where it says what's it called again? After it says about the tumors or hemorrhoids, the Septuagint adds mice swarming in the ships and
I
invading
did
the
actually.
field.
You never listened to me, Isaac.
I listened.
No, you
Maybe I
didn't.
just didn't hear that bit then.
No,
Because I heard you talking about it, but I thought you were talking about later on.
no, I did say
Like
it.
with the because then you said the only place it mentions is with the golden.
No, I mentioned the Septuagint reading.
Okay, maybe it was just what's the guy's name? The one that you said last.
Tsumura.
Tsumura. Maybe it's Tsumura is the one who didn't mention it.
Okay, now on verse 9, with an outbreak of tumors, Hebrew Bible reads, Vayisatru lahem afalim or tchorim. The word Vayisatru is a hapax. Some suggested reading the sin letter in the word as a samech, and the word means to be hidden, i.e., the hemorrhoids were hidden to them, meaning that the hemorrhoids were inside them, and thus more painful, as we read in Kim Chigasonidis and Ibn Kaspi. Klein
That's not
reads the
true.
That's what they say. What can I do?
If they're
that's also
internal,
not
they're
true.
less painful.
True, yeah. They're less painful.
Well, that's how they say it.
Yeah.
Okay. Klein reads the verb seter as broke out or upon, and is related to an Arabic word meaning to have a cracked eyelid or lip, with the implication that the tumors or sores broke the surface of the skin.
That does sound deeply unpleasant.
Sounds like they had a diet low on fiber with all the hemorrhoids. I mean,
Yeah. Okay, now on 10 through 11, Klein comments, without any mention of another assembly of the Lords, the Gathites sent the ark on to Ekron, modern Khirbet el Mukana, about 12 miles northeast of Ashdod, according to Driver, and 19 miles inland, according to McCarter, the closest of the 5 main Philistine cities to Israelite territory. The ark's reputation had apparently preceded it, for the Ekronites immediately wanted to know why this death-dealing object had been brought to them. Driver attributed the first-person pronouns in verses 10 through 11 to a person speaking in the name of the people as a whole, and cites a number of parallels, compare Exodus 17:3, Numbers 20:18 and 19, and Joshua 9:7. Smith, on the other hand, argues that verses 10 through 11 are to be understood as the speech of each individual Ekronite. And finally, on verse 12, the outcry of the city went up to heaven. McCarter compares the phrase with Exodus 2:23 and 3 verses 7 and 9, and writes, quote, the author's point is not simply that the lamentation was very loud. The cry has finally reached the skies, heavens. That is, the plight of the Philistines has come to the attention of the gods. When in the Exodus passages cited the cry of the Israelites reaches God, he determines to intervene on their behalf. In the present story, of course, we expect no active intervention on the part of the gods, but the pattern is the same. The situation on earth has become intolerable, and the Philistines must discover through their priests and diviners, 6:2, the divine solution to their problem. That's it.
Oh yeah. Is there a chat comment?
I'm not. No, doesn't look like it.
Oh, okay. So
Nothing that I
someone
read.
mentioned something that I forgot. Who was it? Oh yeah, Matt White says he addressed it to Lilith, saying the word muscle comes from the Latin because it looks like a mouse, the musculus, like a small mouse.
I did see that, which is a terrifying thought. Just the idea of muscles or being like mice moving under your skin is like, gives me the ick. But thank you for the etymology. That is much appreciated.
Okay. So I doubt that. I mean, I've got another thing going on in an hour, and I doubt we're going to get through the next chapter within that time.
Plus, I gotta get some food anyways. So
Yeah,
Oh,
Food would be ideal, yes.
yeah. I've
did
got a
3
couple things I got to
chapters
take
today,
care of as well.
We read 3 chapters, yes.
Yeah. So thank you very much for this. We're going to be moving on to what is it? 1 Samuel 6 next week.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right.
yeah, and make
And
sorry. Go ahead,
Go on.
Tomer.
No, you go on.
All right, I'll
because
go.
we're in-
Fine. All right. Make sure to join the Discord, which Peter will definitely post a link to because he's just such a sweet, sweet man. And on our Wednesday Apocryphal podcast, we will continue reading. I think what was it? I forgot where we were even in the middle of, honestly, because all these texts start to sound the same after a while. The Apocalypse of Paul. That's what it is. Yeah, the Apocalypse of Paul. So. A lot like the Apocalypse of Peter, but a little bit more amped up. So we're going to continue reading that.
So the origin of Dante's Inferno.
Yes. And then in the next week or two, I will be completely done with my video on biblical cosmology. I am almost halfway done with the script, and it's 6 pages, and that's 12-point font, not double spaced. So it is like that alone is usually like at least 25-ish minutes. So we'll see how
Fair
it
enough.
goes.
Oh,
I'm excited to see it, and it's good to see everyone again. Thank you for.
Yeah,
Just-
I've been waiting for this for Lawrence's biblical
Yeah.
cosmology for months.
Putting
I
it
know.
together is the hardest thing because I have to tie in together Mesopotamian cosmology, and I have to tie in together all the references in the Bible. And I don't want to go verse by verse because that seems disjointed and like it's not very well framed. So like trying to frame it, I think I found a verse that I'm going to frame it around. And that's well, I'm not going to spoil it for you. But yeah, I think I found like a way to structure it where it makes sense. So
Okay.
I-
Thank you very much. Then
I want. Wait,
throw it
I
out
want to finish. Yes, with. There is a long allegorical interpretation by Gregory the Great. I mean, it's not that long, but it's still like. It's very amusing in my opinion. So I want to end it with this musing by him. So he writes, where is it? Yeah. In giving this passage, i.e. the one on the hand of the Lord in verse 6, its spiritual meaning, we recognize 2 kinds of death. The first kind of death is that by which sinners die to righteousness when they sin. The second kind of death is that by which the righteous deliver themselves from the sins in which they had lived and repent of them. The first kind of death enters into human hearts whenever the devil persuades someone to sin. The second kind of death is affected by the virtue of Almighty God. Therefore, we must give attention to both kinds of death in this place, as they are alluded to spiritually. The one type of death, by which sinners arise when they repent of their sins, is alluded to by the words, "The hand of the Lord was heavy upon the inhabitants of Ashdod." But that type of death, by which the Gentiles offered themselves as slaves to impurity and sin, is alluded to when the people of Ashdod were bitten by the mice and died. A mouse, after all, is an unclean animal and could not be eaten according to the law. Therefore, what else could the mice refer to except to demons? And what else is being bitten by mice except being wounded by the penalty for sin? But they were bitten by the mice when they went out to purge their bowels. Now, what does it mean to purge one's bowels other than to reveal the stench of a wretched reputation by one's obedience to sin? Thus, whoever went out to purge his bowels died by the bites of the mice. For by his sinning in plain sight of others, he showed them an example of depravity. And he himself was also detained for eternal death by his dire obligations to the demons. Goodbye, everybody.
didn't I tell you I had to go get some food?
Yeah, now you're hungry. There we go.
Also, yeah, good old second death, born again nonsense. Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I forget which
Doing what you
part
want
of the
is
New
slavery to sin.
Gregory.
So come be a slave
Gregory.
to us.
No, which part of
instead.
the there's a part in the New Testament which talks about being born again, but it's kind of
Oh, yeah.
based off the same idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Is this the dude that made the calendar?
I think so.
yeah, I don't think they're talking about Pope Gregory.
Yeah, it is. It is Gregory the
It
Great.
is Pope Gregory.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So,
Okay.
Lawrence, go eat and ponder what Tomer's just told you.
We'll do.
Go have
Get
a sloppy Joe.
I already.
Oh!
That's disgusting. I already ordered some tacos. So
Close enough.
Okay, I'm gonna go eat ginger and think about literally
Just-
anything else.
Make
Good
sure you
night,
get
everybody.
your fibers, Lawrence. Don't get any hemorrhoids or
course.
anything like
Fibers
that.
in it.
And
See you in
the
the
link to the
Discord.
next stream is in the live chat, so people can hop over there and continue watching ours.
Oh yeah, thank you for that.
Good.
Excellent. Have a good time.
I